The woman no one wanted. A stranger's courage against a valley's darkest secret. When 24-year-old Sarah Whitmore stepped off the wagon in Red Hollow with nothing but a torn dress and $20, the town gave her 3 days before she'd run screaming from the cursed Mercer Ranch. They whispered that Caleb's wife had died under suspicious circumstances, that his children were damaged beyond repair, that no woman had lasted more than a week in that house of grief and shadows. But Sarah didn't run. Instead, she uncovered a truth so dangerous it would bring the most powerful man in the valley to his knees and nearly cost her everything. This is her story. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The wagon driver wouldn't even look at her when he dropped Sarah at the edge of Red Hollow. He just pointed toward the cluster of buildings shimmering in the late afternoon heat, collected his fare, and turned his horses back toward civilization without a word. Sarah stood there in the dust, watching him disappear down the rutted road, and felt the weight of absolute isolation settle over her shoulders like a physical thing. The valley stretched out before her, brutal, unforgiving, beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. Mountains rose on either side, their peaks still touched with snow despite the August heat. The town itself looked like someone had thrown a handful of buildings against the mountainside and hoped for the best. Everything was weathered gray, sun-bleached, temporary. Like the whole place might blow away in a strong wind. Sarah picked up her canvas bag, everything she owned in the world, and started walking. The main street was wider than it needed to be, flanked by false front buildings that promised more than they delivered. A general store, a saloon with bat-wing doors hanging crooked on their hinges, a church with a steeple that leaned slightly to the left. And people. People everywhere, stopping what they were doing to stare at her. She kept her chin up and her eyes forward, even though she could feel their judgment like hands pressing against her skin. The gray dress she wore had been mended so many times the original fabric was hard to identify. Her boots were men's boots, 2 sizes too large, stuffed with newspaper to make them fit. Her dark hair was pinned up under a hat that had belonged to her father before the fever took him. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman with nowhere else to go. That's her. The whisper came from somewhere to her left. The one Mercer sent for. Poor thing doesn't know what she's walking into. Give her 3 days, maybe 4 if she's stubborn. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she didn't break stride. She'd heard worse, been through worse, survived worse. These people didn't know anything about her. The general store was the largest building on the main street, with a covered porch that provided the only shade for half a block. Sarah climbed the steps and pushed through the door, grateful for the relative coolness inside. The smell hit her immediately, leather and tobacco and something sweet she couldn't quite identify. Behind the counter, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles looked up from his ledger. His expression went from curious to pitying in the space of a heartbeat. "You're the Whitmore girl," he said. Not a question. "I'm Sarah Whitmore." She set her bag down and tried to ignore the way her hands were shaking. "I'm looking for the Mercer Ranch. I was told someone here could give me directions." The man, his nameplate read Joseph Kern, Proprietor, exchanged glances with the 2 other customers in the store. An older woman clutching a bolt of calico fabric. A cowhand with sun-scorched features and suspicious eyes. "You know what you're getting into out there?" Kern asked quietly. "I know I have a contract to honor." "Contract won't mean much if you're dead in a ditch." Sarah felt something cold slide down her spine, but she kept her voice level. "Is that a threat or a warning?" "Neither. Just a fact." Kern pulled out a scrap of paper and started drawing a rough map. "You head north out of town, follow the creek road about 3 miles. You'll see a stand of cottonwoods where the road forks. Take the left branch. Another 2 miles and you'll see the ranch house. Can't miss it. Only structure for a mile in any direction." "Thank you." Sarah took the map, started to turn away. "Miss Whitmore." Kern's voice stopped her. "Caleb Mercer is a good man. But that doesn't mean he's not dangerous. And those children..." He shook his head. "What happened to them? What they've been through? It's not something you can fix with a smile and a gentle word." "I'm not here to fix anyone, Mr. Kern. I'm here to work." The older woman with the calico spoke up, her voice surprisingly kind. "There's a room above the saloon. Betty Wilson keeps it clean for travelers. If you need somewhere to go, somewhere safe, I appreciate that. But I have somewhere to go." Sarah picked up her bag and walked out before anyone could say anything else. before the kindness in that woman's voice could crack something inside her that needed to stay whole. The sun was lower now, painting the mountains gold and purple. Sarah started walking north, following Kern's map, and tried not to think about what she was walking toward. She'd answered an advertisement in a St. Louis newspaper 3 weeks ago. Housekeeper wanted for widowed rancher with 3 children, room and board plus $20 per month. Must be of good character and able to start immediately. $20 a month was more than Sarah had seen in the last 6 months combined. She'd written back the same day, claiming skills she only half possessed and references from people who were long dead. Caleb Mercer had responded with a train ticket and brief instructions to meet the wagon in Red Creek. He hadn't mentioned that his wife was dead, hadn't mentioned the rumors, hadn't mentioned that every other woman he'd hired had quit within days. But then again, Sarah hadn't mentioned that she was desperate enough to take any job that came with a roof over her head and food in her stomach. That she'd been living in a boarding house in St. Louis that was one step up from a brothel. That the landlady had started making suggestions about other ways Sarah could earn her keep. So maybe they were even. The creek road was exactly where Kern said it would be. A narrow track that followed a thin ribbon of water through scrub brush and scattered pines. Sarah's boots kicked up dust with every step. Her feet hurt. Her back hurt. The canvas bag seemed to gain weight with every mile. But she kept walking. The cottonwoods appeared like a mirage, their silver-green leaves rustling in the evening breeze. Sarah took the left fork without hesitation and found herself climbing a gentle rise. At the top, the valley opened up before her, and there was the Mercer Ranch. Even from a distance, Sarah could see it was struggling. The main house was a 2-story structure that might have been impressive once, but now sagged like something exhausted. The barn was missing half its roof. Fences leaned at drunken angles. Weeds had taken over what must have once been a kitchen garden. But it was the silence that struck her hardest. No smoke from the chimney despite the approaching dinner hour. No children's voices. No signs of life except a single horse standing in the corral with its head down, looking as defeated as the buildings around it. Sarah stood there for a long moment, taking it all in. Then she squared her shoulders and started down the slope toward the house. She was halfway across the yard when the front door opened. The man who emerged was tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to do anything except endure. He wore work clothes that had seen better days and boots that were coming apart at the seams. But it was his eyes that caught her, gray as winter sky and twice as cold. "You're late," he said. Sarah stopped about 10 feet from the porch. "The wagon driver dropped me in town. I had to walk. Should have been here by 3. Should have been met at the depot like your letter said." Something flickered across his face. Might have been respect, might have been annoyance. Hard to tell. "You're Sarah Whitmore, and you're Caleb Mercer. You know what the job is? Housekeeping, cooking, looking after 3 children. You know what they're saying in town." Sarah met his cold stare with one of her own. "I know they think I won't last 3 days. I know they think your wife died under suspicious circumstances. I know they think your children are broken. I know they think you're either a murderer or a coward, possibly both. Did I miss anything?" Caleb's jaw tightened. For a moment, Sarah thought he might tell her to leave. Then something in his expression shifted. Not warmth exactly, but maybe a fraction less ice. "The last woman quit after 2 days," he said. "The one before that made it 4. Neither of them saw the inside of a week. What scared them off?" "You'll find out soon enough." He turned toward the door, then paused. $30 a month. Not 20. And if you're still here in a week, I'll pay you for the month up front." Sarah's heart kicked against her ribs, but she kept her voice steady. "Why?" "Because I'm desperate. Because my children are desperate. Because this house is falling apart and I can't hold it together alone anymore." He looked at her directly, and Sarah saw something in his eyes that she recognized, the kind of exhaustion that came from trying to carry a weight that was too heavy for one person. "You run. I won't think less of you. Everyone else did." "I don't run." "Then welcome to the Mercer Ranch, Miss Whitmore. Try not to die here." He disappeared inside without waiting for her response. Sarah picked up her bag and followed him into the house. The first thing that hit her was the smell, old food and unwashed bodies, and something else, something heavier. Grief, maybe. Despair. The front room was dim, the curtains drawn tight against the afternoon sun. Sarah's eyes adjusted slowly, taking in the scattered furniture, the dust coating every surface, the general air of abandonment. "Kitchen's through there," Caleb said, pointing to a doorway on the left. "Your room is upstairs, second door on the right. Children's rooms are on the left side. My room is at the end of the hall. Stay out of it. The children, they're here, somewhere. They'll come out when they're ready." Sarah wanted to ask 100 questions, but Caleb was already heading toward the back of the house, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. She heard a door close, then silence. She stood there in the dim room, surrounded by dust and dying light, and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. Then she set down her bag, rolled up her sleeves, and went to find the kitchen. The kitchen was worse than the front room. Dishes were piled in the wash basin, crusted with food from meals long past. The stove was cold and covered in grease. The floor was sticky under her boots. A pot on the counter held something that might have been stew once, but was now just a congealed mass of gray substance. Sarah's stomach turned, but she'd seen worse. She'd lived worse. She found matches in a drawer and got the stove going. Found a bucket and hauled water from the pump outside. Started heating water for washing. While she waited, she began gathering the worst of the dishes, scraping congealed food into a slop bucket she found under the sink. She was elbow-deep in hot water and lye soap when she heard the footsteps. Sarah turned to find a girl standing in the doorway, 11 or 12 maybe, with tangled dark hair and eyes that looked too old for her face. She wore a dress that was too small for her and boots that were too large. She watched Sarah with an expression that was equal parts suspicion and hunger. "You're Clara," Sarah said. The girl didn't answer. "I'm Sarah. Your father hired me to help around the house." "The last lady said that too." "What happened to the last lady?" Clara shrugged. "She left. They all leave." Sarah turned back to the dishes, scrubbing at a particularly stubborn pot. "I'm not the leaving kind. That's what the other one said." "Then I guess we'll see who's right." Silence settled between them. Sarah kept washing dishes, very aware of the girl watching her every move. After a few minutes, Clara spoke again. "You scared?" Sarah considered lying, then decided against it. "Terrified." "Of what?" "Lots of things. Failing, starving, being alone for the rest of my life." She glanced over her shoulder. "But mostly of letting people down who need me." Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then, "We got bread in the cupboard. It's only a few days old, and there's eggs in the cold cellar, if the rats didn't get them." "Thank you." The girl hesitated, then stepped fully into the kitchen. "I can show you where things are, if you want." "I'd appreciate that." For the next hour, Clara moved around the kitchen with the efficiency of someone twice her age, pointing out supplies and explaining the quirks of the ancient stove. She didn't smile, didn't soften. But she stayed, and that felt like progress. By the time full dark had fallen, Sarah had managed to produce a meal of sorts: scrambled eggs, toasted bread, and coffee strong enough to strip paint. It wasn't much, but it was hot and edible, and that was more than this house had seen in a while. "Where are your brothers?" Sarah asked as she set the table. Claire's expression shuddered. "Ben's probably in the barn. He likes it out there. And Emmy—" She stopped, her jaw working. "Emmy doesn't come down for meals anymore." "Why not?" "She doesn't do anything anymore. Not since Mama died." Sarah heard the weight behind those words, grief and anger, and something that might have been shame. "How long ago did your mother die?" 10 months, 3 weeks, 4 days. The precision of it made Sarah's chest ache. "I'm sorry." "Everyone says that. Doesn't bring her back." Before Sarah could respond, the back door opened and Caleb appeared, followed by a thin boy with shaggy brown hair and dirt-smudged cheeks. The boy, Ben, had to be, froze when he saw Sarah, his eyes going wide. "It's all right," Caleb said quietly. "This is Miss Whitmore. She's going to be staying with us for a while." Ben didn't say anything, just slipped past Sarah and sat at the table as far from her as possible. Sarah served the food in silence, very aware of the tension in the room. Clara ate mechanically, her eyes never leaving her plate. Ben picked at his eggs, stealing glances at Sarah when he thought she wasn't looking. Caleb ate like a man who'd forgotten what food tasted like, just fuel to keep the machine running. "There's a little girl," Sarah said finally. "Emmy." She should be eating. Emmy doesn't eat with us, Caleb said flatly. Why not? Because she doesn't. Sarah set down her fork. Is she sick? No. Then why? Drop it, Miss Whitmore. The words came out sharp enough to cut, and Sarah saw both children flinch. She opened her mouth to argue, then caught the look in Caleb's eyes. Not anger exactly, but something deeper. Pain, fear. The look of a man who'd already lost more than he could bear. So Sarah dropped it. For now. After dinner, Clara and Ben disappeared upstairs without being told. Caleb retreated to wherever he spent his evenings, and Sarah was left alone in the kitchen, washing dishes and trying to ignore the heavy silence pressing down on the house. She was drying the last plate when she heard it, a sound so faint she almost missed it. Crying. A child crying, muffled and desperate, from somewhere above her head. Sarah set down the dish towel and moved toward the stairs. The upstairs hallway was dark, lit only by the moonlight coming through a window at the far end. Sarah counted doors, Clara's room, Ben's room, and then a third door that stood slightly ajar. The crying was coming from behind it. Sarah approached slowly, her hand raised to knock, but before her knuckles could touch wood, the crying stopped, just cut off mid-sob, like someone had thrown a switch. Emmy? Sarah called softly. My name is Sarah. I'm not going to hurt you. I just wanted to make sure you're all right. Silence. Sarah waited, her heart pounding. I made eggs for dinner. They're not very good, but they're edible. I could bring you a plate if you're hungry. Still nothing. All right, I'll be downstairs if you need anything. Good night. Sarah turned away from the door, feeling like she'd failed some kind of test she didn't understand. She was halfway down the hall when a voice stopped her, so small and thin it was barely there at all. Sarah? She spun around. The door to Emmy's room had opened wider and a tiny figure stood in the doorway. Even in the dim light, Sarah could see how small she was. Maybe 5 years old, wearing a nightgown that swallowed her whole. Her blonde hair hung in tangled curtains around a face that looked like it had forgotten how to be a child's face. Yes, sweetheart? Are you real? Or are you the pretend kind of lady? Sarah's throat tightened. I'm real. The pretend kind leaves. Mama was real, but she left anyway. I know, I'm sorry. Emmy stared at her for a long moment, those ancient eyes taking in every detail. Then, so quietly, Sarah almost missed it. I'm hungry. Then let's fix that. Sarah held out her hand, half expecting the little girl to disappear like smoke. But Emmy stepped forward, her small hand slipping into Sarah's, and together they walked downstairs to the kitchen. Sarah reheated the eggs and toasted fresh bread while Emmy sat at the table, her feet dangling above the floor. The little girl ate slowly, methodically, like someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to be hungry. Sarah sat across from her, not speaking, just present. When Emmy had finished, she looked up at Sarah with those two old eyes. Can I ask you something? Of course. Are you going to leave like the others? Sarah thought about lying, about offering false promises. But something in Emmy's expression told her the little girl would know. Children always knew. I'm going to try very hard not to, Sarah said finally. I'm going to try to stay and help your family, but I can't promise I'll succeed. All I can promise is that I'll try. Emmy considered this, her small face serious. Then she nodded, like Sarah had passed some kind of test. That's more than the pretend ladies said. She slipped down from the chair, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. At the doorway, she paused and looked back. Thank you for the eggs. You're welcome, sweetheart. Emmy disappeared up the stairs, leaving Sarah alone in the kitchen with the weight of those words pressing against her chest. Thank you for the eggs, such a simple thing, such a devastating thing. Sarah finished cleaning up and climbed the stairs to her room. It was small and bare. A narrow bed, a washstand, a single window looking out over the yard. But it was clean, and it was hers, and that was more than she'd had in months. She unpacked her few belongings, changed into her nightgown, and lay down on the thin mattress. Through the window, she could see the mountains silhouetted against the star-filled sky, beautiful and brutal and utterly indifferent to the small human dramas unfolding in their shadow. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but her mind kept circling back to the faces she'd seen today. Caleb's exhaustion, Clara's suspicion, Ben's fear, Emmy's ancient grief. And underneath it all, the whispers she'd heard in town, suspicious circumstances, broken children. Nobody lasts more than a week. What had happened in this house? What had happened to these people? And more importantly, could Sarah survive long enough to find out? She was still trying to answer that question when sleep finally dragged her under. Sarah woke to darkness and the sound of something breaking downstairs. She sat up fast, her heart hammering, trying to orient herself in the unfamiliar room. The moon had set and the stars provided only the faintest light. She couldn't see the clock, but it felt like the dead hours, 3 or 4 in the morning when the world was at its quietest and darkest. Another crash followed by a man's voice, low and rough, speaking words Sarah couldn't make out. She grabbed her shawl and moved to the door, easing it open. The hallway was pitch black. Sarah felt her way along the wall toward the stairs, moving as quietly as possible. The voices were clearer now. Caleb's voice, and another man's, angry, confrontational. Sarah crept down the stairs, avoiding the spots that creaked, until she could see into the front room. 2 figures stood there, illuminated by a single lantern. Caleb, and a stranger, older, dressed in expensive clothes that looked out of place in this rough house. His face was flushed with anger or drink, possibly both. "Not doing this again, Ezra," Caleb was saying. "Get out of my house." "Your house?" The stranger, Ezra, laughed, but there was no humor in it. "This hasn't been your house for months, Mercer. You're just too stupid to see it." "I see it fine, and I see you for what you are. Now get out before I throw you out. You think you can threaten me? You think anyone in this valley will take your side over mine?" Ezra moved closer, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "I own the bank. I own the sheriff. I own half the businesses in Red Hollow, and soon I'll own this ranch and everything in it, including those children upstairs." Sarah saw Caleb's hands curl into fists, saw the rage building behind his careful control. But before he could respond, Ezra continued, "You're going to lose, Caleb. You're going to lose this ranch, lose those kids, and end up exactly where you belong, in a cell or a grave. And there's not a damn thing you can do to stop it. We'll see about that." "Oh, we will. Judge Harrow is coming next week to inspect the property. And when he sees the state of this place, when he hears about how you've been neglecting those children," Ezra's smile was cruel. "Well, let's just say I know how to make sure he sees things my way." "You son of a bitch!" Caleb lunged forward, but Ezra was already backing toward the door. "Careful, Mercer. Wouldn't want to add assault to your list of problems. Though I suppose one more crime won't matter when they're hanging you for murdering my sister." The words hit like a physical blow. Sarah saw Caleb stop dead, saw the color drain from his face. Ezra's smile widened. "That's right. I know what happened that night. I know what you did, and soon everyone else will know too." He turned and walked out, leaving Caleb standing frozen in the center of the room. Sarah waited in the shadows, her mind racing. Murdering my sister, that meant the woman who died, Caleb's wife. She was Ezra's sister, and Ezra thought Caleb had killed her. Sarah watched Caleb sink into a chair, his head dropping into his hands. He looked like a man who'd been fighting for so long he'd forgotten what victory looked like. A man who was losing. She should go back upstairs. Should pretend she hadn't heard any of this. Should mind her own business and focus on the job she was hired to do. But Sarah had never been good at minding her own business. She stepped into the room. Caleb's head snapped up, his expression cycling from shock to anger to something that might have been shame. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough." Sarah moved closer, keeping her voice low. "Who was that man? Someone you need to stay away from." "That's not an answer." Caleb's jaw tightened. "His name is Ezra Vale. He's a banker, and he's been trying to destroy my family for the last 10 months. Because he thinks you killed his sister. Because he knows I didn't kill his sister, and that terrifies him." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications Sarah didn't fully understand. She pulled out a chair and sat down across from Caleb, studying his haggard face in the lantern light. "Tell me," she said. "Why?" "Because I can't help if I don't know what I'm dealing with." "I'm not asking you to help." "I know, but I'm offering anyway." Caleb stared at her for a long moment, and Sarah could see him weighing his options. Trust this stranger or keep fighting alone. Finally, he let out a long breath and began to speak. My wife's name was Elizabeth. She was Ezra's younger sister. When we married, he tried to stop it, said I was beneath her, said I'd ruin her life. When she chose me anyway, he cut her off. Wouldn't speak to her, wouldn't acknowledge her existence. For 8 years, she had no family except me and the children. Why? Because Ezra Vale doesn't accept defiance. He's used to owning everything and everyone in this valley. When Elizabeth chose her own path, it was the first time anyone had told him no. Sarah thought about the man she'd just seen. The expensive clothes, the entitled rage, the casual threats. And now she's dead. She died in February. A riding accident, they said. Her horse threw her near the creek. By the time I found her, his voice broke. She was already gone. You don't think it was an accident? It wasn't a question, but Caleb answered anyway. The horse she was riding was gentle as a lamb. Elizabeth had been riding since she was 4 years old, and there was... He stopped, his hands clenching on the table. There were things about that day that didn't make sense. Things I couldn't explain. Like what? Like why she was riding alone when she'd promised to wait for me. Like why her horse was found 3 miles away, still saddled but completely calm. Like why there were tracks near where she died, boot prints, not hoof prints, that nobody could explain. Sarah felt ice slide down her spine. You think someone killed her? I think my wife knew something dangerous, and I think she died because of it. What did she know? Caleb shook his head. That's what I've been trying to figure out for 10 months. But every time I get close to an answer, Ezra shows up with a new threat or a new legal document. He's been using his influence to destroy me piece by piece, calling in debts, turning neighbors against me, sending officials to inspect the ranch and report back on what a terrible father I am. The judge he mentioned, Harrow. He's in Ezra's pocket. If he declares me unfit, Ezra can petition for custody of the children, and once he has them, Caleb's voice went hollow. Once he has them, there's nothing to stop him from taking everything else. Sarah sat back, processing this. Why does he want the children? Because they're Elizabeth's, because taking them would hurt me. And because... Caleb hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Because Elizabeth's father left her a substantial inheritance. It's held in trust for the children until they reach majority. Whoever has custody controls that money. How substantial? Enough to make murder worthwhile. The words settled over the room like a shroud. Sarah thought about Emmy's ancient eyes, about Clara's suspicion, about Ben's fear. About 3 children who'd lost their mother and were now being used as pawns in a game they didn't understand. Then we need to find proof, Sarah said. Caleb looked at her like she'd lost her mind. We? You can't fight this alone. You've been trying for 10 months and you're losing. You need help. What I need is for you to keep your head down and your mouth shut. Ezra is dangerous, Miss Whitmore. More dangerous than you can possibly imagine. I'm still here, aren't I? For now. Give it 3 more days. Sarah stood, her jaw set. I told Emmy I would try to stay. I don't break promises to children, so you can either accept my help or spend the next week watching me get in your way regardless. Your choice. For the first time since she'd arrived, Caleb's expression softened. Just a fraction, but enough. You're either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. Sarah moved toward the stairs, then paused. Get some sleep, Mr. Mercer. Morning's going to come whether we're ready or not. She climbed back to her room, her mind churning with everything she'd learned. A murdered woman, a powerful enemy, 3 broken children, and a man who was running out of time, out of options, and out of hope. Sarah had come to Red Hollow looking for work and shelter. What she'd found was a war, and for better or worse, she was now standing right in the middle of it. Morning came too early and too bright. Sarah woke with her neck stiff from bad sleep, and her mind still churning through everything she'd overheard. She dressed quickly in the pre-dawn darkness and made her way downstairs, determined to have coffee ready before anyone else stirred. But Caleb was already in the kitchen, slumped at the table with his head in his hands. He didn't look up when Sarah entered, didn't acknowledge her presence at all, just sat there like a man who'd run out of reasons to move. Sarah lit the stove without a word and started the coffee. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable, more like 2 soldiers in the same trench, too exhausted for small talk. When the coffee was ready, she poured 2 cups and set one in front of Caleb. He wrapped his hands around it like it was the only warm thing left in the world. I didn't kill her, he said quietly. I know that's what everyone thinks, but I didn't kill my wife. I know. He looked up then, his gray eyes bloodshot and haunted. How can you possibly know that? Because you're still fighting for your children. A man who'd kill his wife wouldn't care enough to keep fighting after 10 months of losing. Sarah sat down across from him. What I don't know is who did kill her, or why Ezra is so desperate to make sure nobody finds out. He's protecting someone. Has to be. Elizabeth was his sister. Blood. He might have cut her off, might have hated her choices, but he wouldn't let her kill her walk free unless… Caleb stopped, his jaw working. Unless he had something to gain from it. The inheritance. Maybe. Or maybe it's something worse. Something Elizabeth found out that got her killed. He took a long drink of coffee, grimacing at the heat. The day before she died, she was different. Scared. She kept looking over her shoulder like someone was following her. I asked what was wrong, but she just said she needed to check on something. Said she'd tell me everything once she was sure. Sure of what? I don't know. She died before she could tell me. His voice cracked on the last word, and Sarah saw the grief break through his exhaustion, raw and bleeding and nowhere near healed. She wanted to say something comforting, something that would ease his pain, but empty words wouldn't help, so she just poured him more coffee and let him have his silence. They sat there as the sun began to paint the eastern sky. Two people bound together by circumstance and desperation, and Sarah felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't just a job anymore. It hadn't been since Emmy whispered her first words in nearly a year, since Clara showed her where the bread was kept, since Ben looked at her with those frightened eyes. This was something else, something that felt dangerously close to belonging. The children woke one by one. Ben first, creeping down the stairs like he expected to find the house on fire. Then Clara, her face guarded and suspicious in the morning light. Emmy came last, standing in the doorway with her tangled hair and watchful eyes, waiting to see if Sarah was still real or if the night had transformed her into another pretend lady. Sarah made breakfast, biscuits, and gravy, the kind her mother used to make before the fever took her. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid food, and she watched with satisfaction as the children ate like they'd forgotten what a real meal tasted like. Miss Whitmore, Claire's voice cut through the breakfast quiet. What were you and Pa talking about last night? Caleb's fork froze halfway to his mouth. Sarah felt 3 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Clara's challenging, Ben's fearful, Emmy's too knowing. We were discussing the ranch, Sarah said carefully, and some of the challenges your father has been facing. You mean Uncle Ezra? The word uncle came out like a curse. Clara's jaw was set in a way that reminded Sarah painfully of Caleb's stubborn pride. Yes, your Uncle Ezra. He's not really our uncle, Ben said quietly, his eyes fixed on his plate. Mama said we didn't have to call him that if we didn't want to. What did Mama call him? Sarah asked. A snake. Emmy's small voice made everyone turn. She said he was a snake in fancy clothes. Caleb's face had gone pale, but Clara was nodding. That's right, and Mama said snakes don't stop being dangerous just because they smile at you. Sarah looked at Caleb. Did your wife tell the children what she suspected? No, but children hear things, see things. He pushed his plate away, appetite clearly gone. Clara, take your brother and sister outside. Feed the chickens. But Pa… Now. The edge in his voice left no room for argument. Clara herded her siblings out the back door, and Sarah heard their voices fade as they crossed the yard. They know more than you think, Sarah said. They know too much. They've seen too much. And I can't… Caleb stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I can't protect them from this. From him. From any of it. Then stop trying to protect them alone. What do you suggest, Miss Whitmore? Should I tell them their mother was murdered? That their uncle is probably behind it? That he's trying to take them away so he can control their inheritance and finish whatever scheme got their mother killed? No, but you could start by letting them help. Clara's smart. She's been watching, listening, probably putting pieces together on her own. Use that. Caleb stared at her like she'd suggested arming the children with dynamite. She's 11 years old. She's 11 years old, and she's been living in a war zone for 10 months. You think she doesn't know what's happening? You think any of them don't know? Sarah stood facing him across the table. You want to protect them. Fine. But you can't protect them by keeping them in the dark. All that does is make them easier targets. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? I was 14 when my parents died. Cholera took them both in the same week. And you know what I remember most? Not the grief, not the fear, the not knowing. Adults whispering in corners, making decisions about my future without asking what I wanted, what I knew, what I could handle. Sarah's voice had gone hard. I would have given anything for someone to treat me like I had a brain, like I could be part of the solution instead of just another problem to manage. Caleb opened his mouth, closed it, looked toward the door where his children had disappeared. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. What if I'm wrong? What if telling them puts them in more danger? What if not telling them does? Before Caleb could answer, the sound of hoofbeats interrupted them. Multiple riders coming fast up the drive. Caleb's expression went cold. Get the children. Get them inside. Now. Sarah ran. She found Clara, Ben, and Emmy near the chicken coop, all three staring toward the approaching riders. Sarah grabbed Emmy and Ben's hands, nodding for Clara to follow. Inside, quickly. Don't argue. Something in her tone must have conveyed the urgency, because all three children moved without protest. Sarah herded them into the house and positioned them in the hallway where they couldn't be seen from the front door. Stay here, she ordered. Don't come out unless your father or I call for you. What's happening? Ben's voice was barely a whisper. I don't know yet, but you're going to be fine. She hoped she wasn't lying. Sarah returned to the front room just as Caleb opened the door. Three men sat on horseback in the yard, all dressed in town clothes, all wearing expressions that said they'd rather be anywhere else. The man in front was middle-aged, with a thick mustache and a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest. His eyes were tired and apologetic in a way that made Sarah's skin crawl. Caleb, he said. His voice was flat, rehearsed. You know why we're here. I know Ezra sent you. That's all I need to know. The sheriff shifted in his saddle. Judge Harrow ordered an inspection of the property. We're here to execute that order. Harrow has no jurisdiction over my family. He does when there are concerns about child welfare. The sheriff pulled a folded document from his jacket. It's all legal, Caleb. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Sarah stepped onto the porch, positioning herself slightly in front of Caleb. All three riders' attention swung to her. And you are? The sheriff asked. Sarah Whitmore. I'm Mr. Mercer's housekeeper. One of the other men, younger, with a notebook in his hands, snorted. Another one? How long's this one been here, Caleb? 2 days? 3? 1 day, Sarah said before Caleb could answer. But I don't see how that's relevant to your inspection. It's relevant because it shows a pattern of instability, the notebook man said. His name tag read Deputy Martin. Children need consistency. They need a stable home environment, not a revolving door of what? Sarah's voice could have cut glass. Women desperate enough to work for a man the whole town has decided to condemn without evidence? Deputy Martin's face reddened. Now see here. No, you see here. Sarah descended the porch steps, moving into the yard. She was aware of Caleb behind her, probably wondering what the hell she was doing. She was wondering the same thing. You want to inspect this property? Fine. Inspect it. But let's be clear about what you're really doing. You're not here because you care about those children. You're here because someone with money and influence told you to be here, and you're all too afraid of him to ask why. The sheriff's jaw tightened. Miss Whitmore, I understand you're new here, but you don't know the full situation. I know a railroad job when I see one. I know Ezra Vale has been trying to take this ranch and those children for 10 months. I know he's using his position to harass a widower who's already lost everything that matters. And I know that not one of you has the spine to stand up to him. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the horses seemed to hold their breath. Then the sheriff dismounted, his movements stiff with barely controlled anger. You're right about one thing, Miss Whitmore. We are here to do an inspection, so how about you step aside and let us do our job? Sarah didn't move. Those children have been through enough. They've lost their mother. They've watched their father fight a battle he can't win alone. They've seen women come and go like ghosts, and now you want to parade through their home, looking for reasons to tear them away from the only parent they have left? We're looking for the truth, the sheriff said. No, you're looking for what Ezra Vale told you to find. There's a difference. The sheriff's hand moved toward his gun, and Sarah felt her stomach drop. But before anyone could do something stupid, Caleb's voice cut through the tension. "Let them in!" Sarah turned, shock written across her face. Caleb was standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Caleb? Let them in, Miss Whitmore. They have their orders, and we have nothing to hide." The sheriff looked between them, clearly expecting more of a fight. When none came, he gestured to his men. "All right then, let's get this over with." For the next hour, Sarah watched as the three men moved through the house, making notes, asking questions, examining every corner with eyes that had already decided what they'd find. She followed them like a shadow, correcting every false observation, challenging every leading question. When Deputy Martin commented on the dust in the front room, Sarah pointed out that she'd only arrived yesterday. When the third man, a banker's clerk named Peterson, noted the state of the children's clothes, Sarah explained that new clothes were already ordered and would arrive by week's end. When the sheriff asked about the children's schooling, Sarah informed him that she'd already made arrangements to tutor them herself, having worked as a teacher's assistant in St. Louis. She was making half of it up as she went along, but her voice never wavered. And slowly, grudgingly, she saw doubt creep into the sheriff's expression. They were examining the kitchen when Clara appeared in the doorway. Sarah had told the children to stay upstairs, but Clara had never been good at following orders. "You're Sheriff Coleman," Clara said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. The sheriff turned, his expression softening slightly. "Hello, Clara. You used to come to our house for Mama's birthday parties. You brought me a doll once, when I was little. You said it looked like Mama when she was young." Something flickered across Coleman's face. Guilt, maybe, or shame. "I remember. Do you remember what Mama said about you? She said you were a good man who'd forgotten how to be brave." Clara's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her voice never cracked. "She said good men sometimes make bad choices when they're scared, but she also said that good men can always choose to be brave again." Coleman's jaw worked, his hand tightening on his notebook. "Clara, we're not being hurt here. We're not being neglected. Pa does his best. And Miss Whitmore—" She glanced at Sarah, and something passed between them. Trust, maybe, or recognition. "Miss Whitmore is the first person since Mama died who's treated us like we matter, like we're more than just problems to be solved." Deputy Martin shifted uncomfortably. "Clara, nobody's saying—" "Nobody's—" "Yes, you are. You're here because Uncle Ezra sent you, just like he sends everyone else. But you know what? Mama saw through him. She knew what he was. And before she died, she told Pa that Uncle Ezra would come for us, that he'd try to take everything." Clara's voice dropped to something harder. "She said we should never trust him, never believe him, because men like him only care about one thing, power." "That's enough, Clara." Caleb appeared behind her, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "Go back upstairs." But Clara wasn't finished. She pulled something from her pocket, a folded piece of paper yellow with age. "Mama wrote this 2 days before she died. I found it in her Bible after the funeral." She held it out to Sheriff Coleman. The sheriff took it like it might bite him, unfolding it with shaking hands. Sarah couldn't see what it said, but she watched Coleman's face drain of color as he read. "Where did you get this?" His voice was barely audible. "I told you, in her Bible. Mama always wrote things down when she was scared, said it made them real, made them harder to hide." Clara's eyes never left the sheriff's face. She knew something was going to happen to her, and she knew who was behind it. Coleman looked up at Caleb. "Did you know about this?" "No, Clara never showed me." "Why not?" Martin demanded, turning to Clara. "Why keep this hidden for 10 months? Clara's jaw set in that stubborn line Sarah was coming to recognize. "Because I didn't know who to trust. Because everyone in this valley is scared of Uncle Ezra. Because even the good men have forgotten how to be brave." She looked at Coleman directly. "Are you going to remember, Sheriff? Or are you going to keep being scared?" The silence that followed felt like a held breath. Sarah watched Coleman stare at the paper in his hands, watched him read it again, watched something shift behind his eyes, doubt giving way to certainty, fear giving way to anger. Finally, he folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket. "This inspection is over." "But we haven't finished," Martin started. "I said it's over." Coleman's voice had gone hard. "This family is fine. The children are healthy and cared for. There's no evidence of neglect or abuse." He looked at Caleb, and Sarah saw something like respect in his expression. You'll receive our report by end of week. I expect it'll reflect favorably on your household. Ezra won't like that, Peterson said nervously. Ezra Vale can go straight to hell. Coleman turned and walked out, leaving his men to scramble after him. Sarah, Caleb, and Clara stood frozen in the kitchen, listening to the sound of hoofbeats fading down the drive. Then Clara's legs seemed to give out, and she collapsed into the nearest chair, her whole body shaking. You did good, Caleb said softly, kneeling beside her. You did so good, sweetheart. I was so scared. The words came out broken. I thought they'd take us. I know, but they didn't. You stopped them. Sarah crouched down on Clara's other side. That letter, what did it say? Clara wiped her eyes, struggling to compose herself. I don't know. I never read it. It was sealed, and Mama's handwriting on the outside said, if anything happens to me, give this to someone brave. I've been carrying it for months, waiting for someone brave enough. She looked up at Caleb. I didn't think Sheriff Coleman was that person, but when I saw him looking at our house like it was already condemned, I remembered what Mama said. The good men can choose to be brave again. So I took the chance. What if he'd just given it to Ezra? Sarah asked. Then we'd be lost anyway. At least this way we had a shot. Caleb pulled his daughter into a fierce hug, and Sarah saw his shoulders shake. Whether from relief or grief or fear, she couldn't tell. Maybe all three at once. The rest of the morning passed in a strange, suspended tension. Caleb disappeared into the barn, claiming work that needed doing. Ben and Emmy emerged from upstairs, wide-eyed and silent, clearly having heard everything. Clara retreated to her room, and Sarah was left alone in the kitchen, her hands shaking as she tried to peel potatoes for lunch. She'd just publicly challenged the sheriff of Red Hollow. She'd inserted herself into a conflict that could get her killed. She'd been here one day, one single day, and she'd already made herself a target. What the hell was she doing? The answer came quietly, in the form of small footsteps on the stairs. Emmy appeared in the doorway, her blonde hair still tangled, her nightgown finally traded for a faded dress that was only slightly too big. Sarah? Yes, sweetheart? Are you going to leave now? Like the other ladies? Sarah set down the potato she was holding and looked at this tiny girl who'd already learned that love was temporary and safety was an illusion. No, Emmy, I'm not leaving. Even though you made the sheriff angry? Even though. Emmy considered this, her small face serious. Then she crossed the kitchen and climbed into Sarah's lap like it was the most natural thing in the world. She weighed almost nothing, all bones and fragile hope. Mama used to say that brave people aren't the ones who don't get scared, Emmy said softly. They're the ones who get scared and do the hard thing anyway. Sarah's throat tightened. Your mama sounds like she was very wise. She was, and she was brave too, but she died anyway. Emmy looked up at Sarah with those ancient eyes. Will you die too? Not if I can help it. Promise? Sarah knew she shouldn't. Knew promises like that were lies dressed up as comfort. But she looked at this child who'd already lost so much, who'd already learned to doubt every adult in her life, and she couldn't help herself. I promise I'll do everything I can to stay. Everything. Deal? Emmy nodded, her small arms wrapping around Sarah's neck. Deal. They sat like that for a long time, Sarah holding this broken child and feeling something fierce and protective bloom in her chest. She'd come to Red Hollow looking for shelter. What she'd found was a reason to fight, and she was done running. That night, after the children were in bed and Caleb had retreated to whatever dark corner he called home, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with a cup of terrible coffee and tried to make sense of everything that had happened. The inspection, Clara's letter, Coleman's sudden change of heart, Ezra's obvious desperation. The pieces were there. She could feel them, but they wouldn't fit together into anything that made sense. She was still puzzling over it when Clara appeared in the doorway, wearing a coat over her nightgown and carrying a lantern. You should be asleep, Sarah said. So should you. Clara set the lantern on the table. There's something I need to show you, something I've been too scared to tell Pa about. Clara, please. It's important, and it has to be now while Pa's out checking the fences. Against her better judgment, Sarah stood. All right, show me. Clara led her out into the night, across the yard toward the barn. The structure loomed against the starlit sky, its missing roof making it look like a giant's broken toy. Clara pushed open the door and raised the lantern, illuminating the interior, horse stalls, hay bales, scattered equipment, and a ladder leading up to the loft. "Up there," Clara said. They climbed carefully, the old wood creaking under their weight. The loft was full of loose hay and dust and farm equipment that probably hadn't been touched in years. But Clara moved through it with the confidence of someone who'd made this journey many times before. At the far end, tucked behind a broken plow and covered with a tarp, was a wooden box. Clara pulled back the tarp and opened the box, revealing its contents in the lamplight. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Papers. Dozens of them. Letters, bank statements, legal documents, all carefully organized and clearly hidden with purpose. "I found these a week after Mama died," Clara said quietly. "They were in her wardrobe, hidden under a false bottom. I brought them up here because I was scared Pa would throw them away. Scared Uncle Ezra would find them." She looked at Sarah, her young face suddenly older than any 11-year-old should be. "I think this is what got Mama killed." Sarah knelt down, picking up the first document with shaking hands. It was a bank statement from Vale Savings and Trust, dated 3 years prior. But the numbers had been altered, badly. Original figures crossed out and replaced with different amounts. Deposits that didn't match withdrawals. Accounts that appeared and disappeared. "He's been stealing," Sarah breathed. "Ezra's been embezzling from his own bank." "That's not all." Clara pulled out another sheaf of papers. "These are letters between Uncle Ezra and someone named Judge Harrow. They're talking about land deals, about forcing people off their property, about—" She stopped, her voice shaking. "About making sure certain people don't cause problems, making them disappear." Sarah felt ice flood her veins. She spread the letters out, reading by lantern light, and the picture that emerged was worse than anything she'd imagined. Ezra Vale wasn't just a corrupt banker. He was running a systematic operation to steal land, manipulate courts, and eliminate anyone who got in his way. And Elizabeth Mercer had figured it out. "There's more," Clara said. She pulled out a final document, a will, signed and notarized. "This is Grandpa's will, the real one. It left everything to Mama, the money, the property, everything. But Uncle Ezra produced a different will after Grandpa died, one that split everything 50-50 between him and Mama. He forged it. Mama thought so. She'd been collecting evidence for months, trying to prove it. I think—" Claire's voice broke. "I think she was going to expose him, take everything to the authorities. But he found out before she could." Sarah gathered the papers carefully, her mind racing. This was it. This was the proof they needed. But it was also a death sentence. If Ezra found out they had these documents, he wouldn't hesitate to do to them what he'd done to Elizabeth. "Does your father know about any of this?" Sarah asked. "No, I was too scared to tell him. Every time I tried, I kept thinking about Mama, about what happened to her when she tried to be brave." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I'm 11 years old, Sarah. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to fight someone like Uncle Ezra, but I can't just keep hiding these papers and hoping everything will be okay." Sarah pulled the girl close, holding her while she cried. And in that moment, standing in a dusty barn loft with enough evidence to hang a powerful man, Sarah made a decision. She wasn't just fighting to keep her job anymore, wasn't just fighting to give these children a stable home. She was fighting to make sure Elizabeth Mercer's death meant something, to make sure the truth came out, no matter the cost. "We tell your father," Sarah said firmly, "tomorrow. We tell him everything. And then we figure out how to take Ezra down without getting killed in the process. What if Pa says it's too dangerous? What if he wants to destroy the evidence to keep us safe? Then we convince him otherwise. Because hiding from this hasn't kept you safe. It's just given Ezra more time to tighten his grip." Sarah looked at the papers, then back at Clara. "Your mother was brave enough to stand up to him. We can be too." Clara nodded, wiping her eyes. "Okay, tomorrow." They carefully repacked the box, covered it with the tarp, and climbed back down the ladder. The night air felt cold after the close warmth of the loft, and Sarah shivered despite her shawl. They were halfway back to the house when Sarah saw him, a man on horseback, sitting perfectly still at the edge of the property. Too far away to identify in the darkness, but close enough to have seen them leave the barn. Close enough to know they'd been up to something. Sarah's blood ran cold. "Clara, walk normally. Don't run. Don't look at him." "Who is it?" "I don't know, but whoever it is, we don't want them to know we saw them." They continued toward the house. Sarah's skin crawling with the sensation of being watched. When they reached the porch, she risked a glance back. The rider was gone. But the message was clear. They were being watched. Had probably been watched for days, maybe weeks. And whoever was doing the watching now knew that Sarah and Clara had been in the barn, had been looking at something important. Ezra would know by morning. Sarah ushered Clara inside, locked the door, and leaned against it with her heart hammering. They were out of time. Whatever move they were going to make, it had to be soon, before Ezra decided to eliminate the problem permanently. She found Caleb in his room, sitting in the dark by the window. He didn't seem surprised when Sarah knocked and entered without waiting for permission. "We need to talk," she said. "Now." He turned, and in the moonlight streaming through the window, Sarah saw a man who'd been broken by grief and worn down by fighting. A man who was barely holding on. She was about to make his night so much worse. "Clara found evidence," Sarah said without preamble. "Documents that prove Ezra's been embezzling, forging wills, manipulating the courts. Everything your wife suspected and more." Caleb stood slowly. "Where?" "Hidden in the barn. But there's a problem. Someone was watching us tonight. They saw us go into the loft. By tomorrow, Ezra will know we have something. Then we need to move the documents somewhere safe. We need to do more than that. We need to get them to someone who has the authority and the courage to act on them. Someone outside Ezra's influence." "There is no one outside his influence, not in this valley." "Then we go outside the valley." Caleb stared at her. "You're talking about federal marshals, the territorial capital. That's a 3-day ride minimum. Can you make it in 2? Maybe, if I kill the horse getting there." "Then you leave before dawn. Take the evidence, ride hard, and don't stop until you reach someone who can help." Sarah moved closer. "Clara and I will stay here. We'll keep up appearances, make it look like everything's normal. Buy you time." "Absolutely not. If Ezra realizes I'm gone, he'll come here looking for answers, which is exactly what we want. Better he focuses on us than on chasing you down." Sarah's voice was steady despite the fear coursing through her. "You said it yourself. You can't protect your children by fighting alone. Let me help. Let Clara help. Trust us to hold the line while you get the cavalry." Caleb's hands clenched into fists. "If something happens to you, if he hurts you, then you make sure it matters. You make sure those documents reach the right people and Ezra Vale pays for everything he's done." Sarah held his gaze. "Your wife died fighting him. Don't let that death be for nothing." The words hung between them, heavy with implication and sacrifice. Finally, Caleb nodded. "I'll need to see the documents, make copies if possible. And I'll need to brief Coleman. Despite everything, he's still the law here. Clara can show you where they are. I'll keep watch." They worked through the night, the 3 of them. Caleb and Clara in the barn, carefully documenting everything in the hidden box. Sarah in the house, watching from windows, listening for sounds of approaching riders, keeping the younger children calm when they woke with nightmares. By the time pre-dawn gray began to lighten the eastern sky, Caleb had everything he needed packed into saddlebags. He changed into riding clothes, checked his rifle 3 times, and said goodbye to each of his children like he might never see them again. Maybe he wouldn't. 2 days, he said to Sarah at the door. 3 at most. Can you hold out that long? We'll manage. If Ezra shows up, I'll handle it. Sarah. He caught her arm, his grip tight. Don't try to be a hero. Don't do anything stupid. Just keep my children safe and stay alive. That's all I'm asking. That's what I do best, Mr. Mercer. Survive. He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. When this is over, assuming we both live through it, I'm giving you a raise. When this is over, I'm asking for one. The ghost of a smile crossed his face, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. Then he was gone, riding into the breaking dawn, leaving Sarah alone with 3 terrified children in a valley full of enemies. She stood on the porch and watched until he disappeared over the ridge. Then she turned back to the house, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. Because Ezra Vale was coming. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But soon. And when he arrived, Sarah Whitmore was going to be ready. The first day without Caleb passed in tense, exhausting normalcy. Sarah kept the children busy with chores and lessons, her eyes constantly drifting to the windows, watching for riders that didn't come. Clara moved through the house like a ghost, jumping at every sound. Ben retreated further into silence. and Emmy clung to Sarah's skirts like she was afraid that if she let go, Sarah would disappear too. By evening, Sarah's nerves were stretched so thin she could barely stand still. She made dinner, venison stew from meat she found in the cold cellar, biscuits that came out harder than they should have, and watched the children push food around their plates without eating. "He's coming back," Emmy said suddenly, her small voice cutting through the silence. "Pa's coming back, right?" "Of course he is," Sarah said with more confidence than she felt. "Mama said she'd come back too, from her ride, but she didn't." The words landed like a punch to the gut. Sarah saw Clara's face go white, saw Ben's hands start to shake. She knelt beside Emmy's chair, taking the little girl's hands in hers. "Your father is different from that day. He knows what he's riding into. He's prepared. And he's got something your mother didn't have. He's got us here, holding down the fort, making sure there's something to come back to. What if Uncle Ezra comes while Pa's gone? Then I'll handle it." "How?" Clara's voice was sharp with fear. "How are you going to handle a man who had our mother murdered? A man who controls the whole valley?" Sarah stood, meeting Clara's eyes directly. "The same way your mother would have, by being smarter than he is, by not backing down, by remembering that men like Ezra only have power because everyone's too scared to call their bluff. And if he's not bluffing, then we make him wish he was." The words sounded braver than Sarah felt, but something in Clara's expression softened. Not quite hope, but maybe the beginning of it. They were cleaning up dinner when Sarah heard the horses. Her blood turned to ice. She grabbed the rifle Caleb had left propped by the door, checked that it was loaded, and turned to the children. "Upstairs, all of you. Clara's room. Lock the door. Don't come out until I say it's safe." "But," Ben started, "now." The edge in her voice sent them scrambling. Sarah waited until she heard the upstairs door close and the lock click, then moved to the window. 4 riders in the yard. She recognized Deputy Martin and the banker's clerk Peterson. The other 2 were strangers, hard-faced men wearing guns like they knew how to use them. But no Ezra. That scared her more than if he'd been there himself. Sarah took a breath, steadied her shaking hands, and opened the front door. Martin dismounted, his expression caught between apologetic and determined. "Miss Whitmore, we need to speak with Caleb." "He's not here." "Where is he?" "Checking the north pasture. Won't be back until late." The lie came smoothly, practiced. "What's this about?" "There's been a complaint concerning the children." Sarah's grip tightened on the rifle. "What kind of complaint?" "That they're being kept in unsafe conditions. That Caleb's abandoned them with an unqualified caretaker while he—" Martin consulted a paper in his hand. "While he conducts business elsewhere." "He's running his ranch. That's not abandonment. Nevertheless, we have orders to inspect the premises again, and to take the children into protective custody if we deem it necessary." Sarah felt the world tilt sideways. This was it. This was Ezra's move. He knew Caleb was gone. The watcher from last night must have reported back, and now he was making his play to take the children while there was no one here to stop him. No one except Sarah. "You inspected this property 2 days ago," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Sheriff Coleman found everything satisfactory. What's changed?" "New information has come to light." Peterson stepped forward, his weasel face pinched with false concern. "Information suggesting that Mr. Mercer has fled the territory with stolen property belonging to Mr. Vale." "That's a lie." "Is it? Then where is he? And why did he leave in the middle of the night without telling anyone?" Sarah's mind raced. They'd been watching, all night probably. Saw Caleb leave, saw him take the saddlebags full of evidence. And now they were here to clean up the loose ends. "He left to get supplies," Sarah said, "from Red Creek. He'll be back tomorrow." "Then you won't mind if we wait?" One of the hard-faced strangers spoke up, his hand resting casually on his gun. "We can make ourselves comfortable in the barn, keep an eye on things until Caleb returns." "I mind. This is private property. You have no right." "We have every right." Martin pulled out another document. "This is a warrant signed by Judge Harrow authorizing us to take custody of the Mercer children pending further investigation into their father's whereabouts and fitness." Sarah's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She looked at the paper, official seals, legal language, Harrow's signature bold across the bottom. It might be corrupt as hell, but it was legal. At least legal enough that Martin could use it to take the children and claim he was just following orders. The children are asleep, Sarah said. They've been through enough trauma. You're not dragging them out of bed because Ezra Vale is throwing a tantrum. We're not asking your permission, Miss Whitmore. Martin started toward the door. Sarah raised the rifle. The yard went very still. Miss Whitmore? Martin's voice was careful now, the voice of a man talking to someone unstable. Put down the gun. You don't want to do this. You're right. I don't want to. But I will if you take one more step toward that door. You're interfering with a legal warrant. That's a crime. So is kidnapping 3 children on a trumped-up charge invented by a man who murdered their mother. The words hung in the air like smoke. Sarah saw Martin flinch, saw Peterson's face go pale. Even the hard-faced strangers looked uncomfortable. That's a serious accusation, Martin said quietly. It's the truth. Elizabeth Mercer was murdered because she found evidence that Ezra Vale has been embezzling from his own bank for years. She was going to expose him, so he had her killed. And now he's trying to take her children so he can control their inheritance and bury the truth forever. You have proof of this? Caleb has the proof. He's taking it to the territorial authorities right now, which is why Ezra sent you here, to grab the children and use them as leverage when Caleb comes back. Martin exchanged glances with Peterson. Sarah could see doubt creeping into their expressions, could see them putting pieces together, the sudden urgency of the warrant, Ezra's insistence that they move tonight, the timing of Caleb's departure. If what you're saying is true, Martin started, then you need to ask yourself which side of history you want to be on, Sarah interrupted. Do you want to be the men who helped a murderer steal 3 orphans? Or do you want to be the men who stood up and said enough? It's not that simple. It never is. But it's also not that complicated. Those children have already lost their mother. Are you really going to help Ezra take their father too? Before Martin could answer, one of the hard-faced men spoke up. We're wasting time. Vale said if she gave us trouble, we remove her from the equation. He drew his gun. Sarah swung the rifle toward him, her finger tightening on the trigger. Try it. Sarah, don't. Martin's voice cracked with panic. Nobody needs to get shot here. Let's just... The gunshot came from behind the house. Everyone froze. Then 3 more shots in rapid succession, followed by shouting. Sarah's blood turned to ice. The children. She spun toward the door just as Clara's scream split the night. Sarah didn't think. She just moved, running through the house toward the back door, the rifle still clutched in her hands. Behind her, she heard Martin yelling something, heard boots thundering after her, but she didn't stop. The back door was open, hanging crooked on its hinges like someone had kicked it in. Sarah burst through into the night and saw 2 more men on horseback near the barn. Clara was fighting one of them, kicking and screaming as he tried to haul her up onto his saddle. Ben was on the ground, dazed and bleeding from his temple. And Emmy was running toward the creek, her white nightgown ghostly in the darkness, a 3rd rider chasing after her. Sarah raised the rifle and fired. The shot went wide. She'd never been a good marksman, but it was loud enough to make everyone freeze. The man holding Clara dropped her. The rider chasing Emmy wheeled his horse around. Let them go. Sarah's voice didn't sound like her own. It sounded like something carved from stone in fury. Let them go, or the next shot won't miss. You don't have the spine, the man near Clara said. He was young, couldn't be more than 25, with a face that would have been handsome if it wasn't twisted with cruelty. Ladies don't shoot people. This one does. Sarah pulled the trigger again. This time the bullet kicked up dirt inches from the man's boot. He jumped back, his bravado evaporating. You crazy bitch! I'm a woman defending 3 children from kidnappers. Now get on your horses and ride away, or I'll show you just how crazy I can get. The rider near Emmy had circled back, and Sarah saw him exchange glances with the others. They were weighing their options, 3 armed men against 1 woman with a rifle. The math should have favored them. But Sarah had something they didn't. She had nothing left to lose. Martin, she called without taking her eyes off the men. You seen this? You seen what Ezra's men are willing to do to children? Martin appeared beside her, his own gun drawn. His face was white with shock. What the hell are you doing? This to the men on horseback. Following Vale's orders, the young one said. He said if the bitch interfered, we take the kids by force. He didn't say anything about breaking into a house, about assaulting children. He said do whatever it takes. Martin looked at the scene. Clara sobbing on the ground, Ben trying to sit up, Emmy running back towards Sarah with tears streaming down her face. Then he looked at Sarah and she saw the moment something broke inside him. The moment he stopped being Ezra Vale's pawn and started being his own man again. "Put your guns away," Martin said to the riders. "All of you, this is over." "Vale's not going to like that," the young one said. "Then Vale can take it up with me. But you're not touching these kids. Not tonight. Not ever." Martin's voice was hard now, the voice of someone who'd remembered what his badge was supposed to mean. "Now ride out of here before I arrest all of you for attempted kidnapping." For a moment, Sarah thought they might actually fight. Thought guns might start going off and people might die right here in this dusty yard under the stars. But then the young man spat in the dirt and wheeled his horse around. "This isn't over," he said. "Yeah, it is," Martin replied. "You just don't know it yet." The riders disappeared into the darkness, and Sarah felt her legs start to shake. She lowered the rifle before she dropped it, then ran to the children. Emmy crashed into her arms first, followed by Clara. Ben was still sitting on the ground, touching his bleeding temple with shaking fingers. "Let me see." Sarah knelt beside him, tilting his head toward the light spilling from the house. The cut wasn't deep, but it was going to leave a hell of a bruise. "What happened?" "They came through the window," Ben said, his voice thin with shock. "We were hiding like you said, but they knew where we were. They broke the lock and—" His voice cracked. "I tried to stop them. I tried." "You did good, Ben. You did so good." Sarah pulled him close, feeling his whole body trembling. Over his head, she met Claire's eyes and saw the same thought reflected back. They'd been betrayed. Someone had told Ezra's men exactly where the children would be. Martin approached slowly, his gun back in its holster. "Miss Whitmore, I need you to understand something. What just happened? That wasn't supposed to happen. I thought we were here to serve a legal warrant, not to break into houses and terrorize children. You think that makes it better? You think following orders absolves you of what you almost did?" "No, I don't." Martin's jaw was tight. "But I'm trying to make it right, starting now." "How?" "By making sure those men don't come back. By posting a watch on this property until Caleb returns. By telling Judge Harrow that his warrant was served and found the children in good health and safe conditions." He paused. "And by looking into what you said, about Elizabeth Mercer, about Ezra Vale." Sarah wanted to tell him it was too little, too late, wanted to scream at him that he should have done this months ago, before 3 children had to watch their mother die and their father break. But she swallowed the words because Martin was all they had right now, the only law enforcement who'd shown even a shred of decency. "Those men knew where the children were hiding," she said. "Someone told them which room, which window." "Peterson." Martin's face darkened. "He left right after we got here. Said he needed to check something. Must have circled around back and given them the information." "Where is he now?" "Gone with the others, I'd guess. Probably halfway back to Vale's estate by now." Martin looked toward the road, then back at Sarah. "I can't protect you from Ezra. Not directly. He's got too much power, too many people in his pocket. But I can make sure you've got warning when he makes his next move. And I can buy you time." "That's all we need, time." Martin nodded, then mounted his horse. "Keep that rifle loaded, Miss Whitmore. And don't hesitate to use it if they come back." "I won't." He rode off, leaving Sarah alone with 3 traumatized children and a house that suddenly felt about as secure as a paper bag in a windstorm. She herded the children back inside, locked what was left of the back door, and dragged a heavy cupboard in front of it. Then she moved them all into the front room where she could watch both entrances and did a quick inventory of their weapons. The rifle, a revolver she found in Caleb's room, and a shotgun that looked older than the valley itself but still functioned. It would have to be enough. Clara helped her check the ammunition while Ben held Emmy, both of them huddled together on the sofa like they were trying to take up as little space as possible. Sarah's heart broke looking at them. These 3 children who'd been through so much and were still being asked to endure more. "Sarah?" Clara's voice was small. "Are they going to come back?" "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe." "What do we do if they do?" Sarah looked at this 11-year-old girl who'd already seen her mother die and her father break, and now had men trying to drag her away in the night, who'd been asked to be brave over and over again without any promise that bravery would be rewarded. "We fight," Sarah said simply. We fight like hell, and we don't stop until your father comes home with help. And if he doesn't come home, then we fight anyway, because that's what your mother would have done. That's what she did do, until they killed her for it." Sarah set down the gun she was loading and looked at all three children. "I know you're scared. I know you're tired. I know this isn't fair and you shouldn't have to deal with any of this. But right now, tonight, we're all each other's got. So we're going to stick together, we're going to stay smart, and we're going to make it through to morning. Deal?" Three small voices answered in unison. "Deal." They spent the night in shifts. Sarah took first watch, sitting by the window with the rifle across her lap, watching the yard and the road beyond. Clara insisted on taking second watch despite Sarah's protests, arguing that she knew the property better than Sarah did and would notice if something was wrong. Ben and Emmy slept fitfully on the sofa, jerking awake at every sound, their dreams clearly full of breaking windows and reaching hands. Around 3 a.m. during Clara's watch, Sarah heard the girl gasp. "What is it?" Sarah was on her feet instantly, gun raised. "Riders, coming from the east." Clara's voice was tight with fear. 3 of them." Sarah moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. Sure enough, 3 shapes on horseback were approaching slowly, carefully, like they were expecting trouble. Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger. "Wake your brother and sister. Get them upstairs, same as before." "But now, Clara." The girl moved quickly, rousing Ben and Emmy and herding them toward the stairs. Sarah watched them go, then turned back to the window. The riders had stopped at the edge of the yard. One of them dismounted, and in the moonlight, Sarah could make out a woman's silhouette. Older, heavy-set, moving with a stiffness that spoke of hard years and harder work. The woman cupped her hands around her mouth. "Sarah Whitmore, don't shoot. I'm not with Vale." Sarah didn't lower the gun. "Who are you?" "Martha Reed. I run the boarding house in town. I'm here to help." "How do I know you're telling the truth?" "Because I watched Ezra Vale's men ride past my place an hour ago, bragging about how they were going to snatch 3 kids out of their beds and collect a fat bonus from the boss. Because I remember Elizabeth Mercer when she was just a scared girl marrying a poor rancher against her brother's wishes. And because I'll be damned if I stand by and let that son of a bitch hurt her children the way he hurt her." There was such raw fury in the woman's voice that Sarah found herself believing it. She lowered the rifle slightly. "You're armed?" "All 3 of us, and we can shoot straight if it comes to that." Martha gestured to her companions, 2 men, both weathered by sun and age. "This here's Frank Cooper and James Stone. They worked for Elizabeth's father before Ezra ran them off. They got no love for Vale. None of us do." Sarah made a decision that was either brilliant or suicidal. She opened the door. Martha Reed climbed the porch steps with the heaviness of a woman who'd lived through too much disappointment but kept showing up anyway. Up close, Sarah could see she was older than she'd first appeared, maybe 60, with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that looked like they'd seen every trick men could pull and weren't impressed by any of them. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," Martha said, standing up to Vale's men with nothing but a borrowed rifle and 3 terrified kids behind you. "Didn't have much choice." "There's always a choice. Most people choose to look the other way." Martha glanced around the room, taking in the barricaded door, the weapons laid out on the table, the general air of siege preparation. "Where's Caleb?" "Gone to get help. Won't be back for at least another day, maybe 2. So Vale's making his move while the house is undefended. Smart. Evil, but smart. Martha looked at Sarah directly. "You know he's going to come himself next time, don't you? He's not going to trust hired guns after they failed tonight. He'll come with enough men to make sure the job gets done." "Let him come. Easy to say when you haven't seen what Ezra Vale is capable of. I have. I saw what he did to his sister. I saw the broken bones she tried to hide under long sleeves and high collars. I saw the fear in her eyes every time his name was mentioned." Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. "He beat her?" "When they were younger, before she married Caleb. Their father was a mean drunk who taught both his kids that violence was how you solved problems. Ezra learned the lesson well. Elizabeth spent her whole life trying to unlearn it." Martha's expression was grim. "When she married Caleb, I thought maybe she'd finally be safe. And she was, for a while. Until she made the mistake of standing up to her brother one too many times." "You think Ezra killed her himself?" I think he ordered it done. Same difference in the eyes of the law, if we can ever get someone to care about the law around here. Martha moved to the window, looking out at the dark yard. Frank and James will take first watch outside. I'll stay in here with you and the children. Come dawn, we're going to need to figure out a better plan than just sitting here waiting for Vale to bring an army. Caleb said, 2 days? 2 days is a lifetime when you're under siege. We need to move those kids somewhere safe, somewhere Vale can't get to them. Where? He controls the whole valley. Martha was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then, the old mining camp, up in the hills, about 5 miles north. It's been abandoned for years, but the structures are still solid. More importantly, there's only one way in and one way out. Easy to defend. Easy to trap, too. That's a risk, but it's better than staying here sitting ducks for whenever Vale decides to ride up with enough men to overwhelm us. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to say they should stay and fight, but Martha was right. This house was indefensible. Too many windows, too many doors, too much open ground in every direction. If Ezra came with a dozen men, they wouldn't last an hour. All right, Sarah said, we move at first light. How do we get there without being seen? Creek bed runs most of the way. Not comfortable, but it's cover. Martha turned from the window. Get what you need together, blankets, food, water, whatever weapons you can carry. And Sarah? Her expression softened slightly. Thank you for not running. Elizabeth would have liked you. The words hit harder than they should have. Sarah had to swallow past the sudden tightness in her throat. I never met her. Doesn't matter. You're fighting for her children like they were your own. That's all she would have needed to know. They spent the rest of the night preparing. Martha proved to be terrifyingly efficient, organizing their supplies with military precision. Frank and James took up positions outside, watching the road, ready to give warning if riders approached. And the children, exhausted, traumatized, running on nothing but fear and adrenaline, helped where they could. Clara packed clothes and blankets. Ben gathered what food they had. Emmy stayed close to Sarah, her small hand gripping Sarah's skirt like a lifeline. As the eastern sky began to lighten from black to gray, Sarah found herself standing on the porch one last time, looking at the house that had been her home for all of 3 days. It wasn't much, half broken, falling apart, full of grief and ghosts, but it had been theirs. The place where she'd first held Emmy, where Clara had shown her trust, where Ben had started to speak again. Now they were abandoning it because a man with money and power couldn't stand the idea of losing control. Ready? Martha appeared beside her, a pack slung over her shoulder and a rifle in her hands. As I'll ever be. They moved out as a group, Sarah and Martha flanking the children, Frank and James bringing up the rear. The creek bed was exactly as unpleasant as Martha had promised, muddy and rocky and filled with thorns, but it provided cover from the road. They moved in silence, the children too tired and scared to complain, the adults too focused on watching for threats. They were about halfway to the mining camp when Frank called out a warning. Riders, coming from town. Everyone froze. Sarah pushed the children behind a large boulder and raised her rifle, squinting toward the road. Sure enough, a group of riders, at least 8, was thundering toward the Mercer Ranch, and at their head, riding a black horse like he owned the entire valley, was Ezra Vale himself. Sarah's blood ran cold. He'd come, just as Martha predicted, and if they'd stayed at the house, they'd be trapped right now, outnumbered and outgunned. They watched in tense silence as the riders reached the ranch, saw them dismount and storm the house, heard the distant sound of breaking furniture and shouted curses as they realized the place was empty. Then Ezra emerged onto the porch, and even from this distance, Sarah could see the rage in his posture. He shouted something to his men, pointing in different directions. The riders scattered, fanning out to search the property. We need to move, Martha whispered. Now, before they expand the search. They continued up this creek bed, moving as quickly as they dared while still staying quiet. Every snapped twig made Sarah's heart jump. Every bird call made her think it was a signal from Vale's men. But they made it. After what felt like hours but was probably only 45 minutes, they rounded a bend and saw the mining camp ahead. It was exactly as rundown as Sarah had feared. A collection of wooden structures that looked like a strong wind might knock them over, mine shaft entrances dark and uninviting, evidence of old rock slides everywhere. But it was shelter. And more importantly, it was defensible. Martha led them to the largest building, what must have once been the mine office. The roof was intact, the walls were solid, and there was only one door and two small windows. They filed inside, and Sarah immediately began assessing their position. Clara, Ben, Emmy, stay away from the windows. Martha and I need to figure out how to what? A new voice interrupted. How to hide like cowards while that bastard burns down everything your father built? Sarah spun toward the door. Standing there silhouetted against the morning light was Sheriff Coleman, and he wasn't alone. Behind him were at least 6 men, all armed, all watching Sarah with expressions that ranged from sympathetic to determined. Sarah raised her rifle. You working for Vale now? Hell no. Coleman stepped inside, his hands raised to show he meant no harm. I'm here because I spent all night reading that letter Clara gave me, the one from her mother, and I spent the last few hours talking to people Elizabeth trusted before she died. People who told me things I should have heard months ago. What kind of things? Things about the night Elizabeth died, about who was seen near the creek where she fell, about payments Ezra made to certain men right around that time, about how convenient it was that the only witness to her accident was one of Vale's ranch hands. Coleman's jaw was tight. I've been a fool, Miss Whitmore. A coward. I let Vale push me around because he owned the bank and I was afraid of losing my job. But I'm done being afraid. Why should I believe you? Because I brought help. Coleman gestured to the men behind him. This is Tom Warren. He worked for Elizabeth's father, Jack Morrison. His son was run off his homestead by Vale last year. Pete Johnson, Henry Lee, Robert Cross, and Sam Delaney, all men who've got reason to hate Ezra Vale and want to see him pay for what he's done. Sarah looked at each man in turn, trying to judge their sincerity. They looked tired, angry, but also determined in a way that felt real. Vale's at the ranch right now, Martha said. He's got at least 8 men with him, probably more. I know, I saw them ride out. Coleman's expression was grim. That's why we need to move fast. While he's distracted searching the property, we fortify this position and send riders to the neighboring counties for backup. We're going to need federal marshals if we're going to make this stick. Caleb's already gone for marshals, Sarah said. He left yesterday. Good. Then we just need to hold out until he gets back. Coleman looked around the mining camp, assessing it with a tactical eye. This place is defensible, but we need to improve it. Block some of these access points, set up clear firing lines, establish a water source. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The men worked to fortify the camp while Sarah and Martha kept the children calm and out of the way. They blocked mine shafts with rocks, created makeshift barricades, positioned shooters at key points. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Clara helped where she could, her young face set in determined lines. At one point, Sarah found her sitting on a rock overlooking the valley, staring toward the distant ranch. You thinking about your pa? Sarah asked, sitting beside her. Thinking about Mama. This is where she used to bring us before she died. She'd pack a lunch and we'd hike up here, and she'd tell us stories about when she was young, about how she met Pa, about how love was worth fighting for, even when it was hard. She sounds like she was something special. She was. And Uncle Ezra hated her for it. Hated that she chose Pa over him. Hated that she was happy while he was... Clara paused, searching for the right word. While he was empty. That's what Mama called him once. She said he was empty inside, and he tried to fill up that emptiness by controlling everyone around him. Your Mama was a smart woman. She was. And she died trying to stop him. Clara looked at Sarah, tears streaming down her face. What if we can't stop him either? What if he wins anyway? Sarah pulled the girl close. Then we go down fighting. But Clara, listen to me. Your Mama didn't fail. She found the evidence. She hid it where you could find it. She made sure that even if she didn't survive, the truth would come out eventually. That's not failure. That's the bravest thing I've ever heard. You think Pa's going to make it back with help? I think your Pa is fighting for his children, and there's no force on earth stronger than a parent protecting their kids. They sat there for a while, looking out over the valley, and Sarah found herself praying to something she wasn't sure she believed in, that Caleb Mercer was still alive, that he'd made it to the territorial capital, that help was coming. Because if it wasn't, they were all going to die in this abandoned mining camp, and Ezra Vale was going to win. That afternoon, just as Sarah was starting to hope they might actually survive this, one of the lookouts called down a warning. Riders coming! At least a dozen! Sarah's heart sank. She grabbed her rifle and ran to the barricade, positioning herself where she could see the approach. The children were already hidden in the mine office with Martha standing guard. The riders came slowly, deliberately, making no attempt to hide their numbers. And at their head, riding that black horse like an avenging angel, was Ezra Vale. He stopped just outside rifle range, close enough that Sarah could see his face clearly. He was older than she'd expected, maybe 50, with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard, dressed in expensive clothes that looked ridiculous out here in the dusty hills. But there was nothing ridiculous about his eyes. They were cold and calculating and utterly without mercy.
Sarah Whitmore. His voice carried easily across the distance. I know you're in there. I know you have my nieces and nephew. Send them out and nobody has to get hurt. Sarah didn't answer, just kept her rifle trained on his chest. Don't be stupid, Miss Whitmore. You're outnumbered and outgunned. There's no way you can win this fight. Send out the children and I'll let you and everyone with you ride away unharmed. He's lying, Coleman muttered beside her. The moment those kids are in his hands, he'll kill every witness. I know, Sarah raised her voice. No deal, Vale. Those children are staying right here where they belong. Ezra's expression darkened. You don't know what you're interfering with. This is family business, none of your concern. Murder is everyone's concern. We know what you did to your sister. We know about the embezzlement. We know everything.
For just a moment, Sarah saw something flicker across Ezra's face. Fear, maybe, or surprise that they'd put it together. Then the mask was back, smooth and cold. You don't know anything. And even if you did, who's going to believe the word of a desperate housekeeper and a failed rancher over mine? I own this valley, Miss Whitmore. I own the banks, the judges, the businesses. I own the very ground you're standing on. You don't own those children, and you never will. We'll see about that. Ezra raised his hand, and Sarah saw his men begin to spread out, flanking their position. Last chance, Miss Whitmore. Send out the children, or we're coming in to get them. Sarah looked at Coleman, at the 6 men with them, at the makeshift barricades that suddenly seemed pathetically inadequate. They were about to get into a gunfight with a dozen armed men, and there was a very good chance none of them would survive. But she thought about Emmy's small hand in hers, about Clara's fierce courage, about Ben finally starting to trust again, about Elizabeth Mercer, who died trying to protect her children from this monster, and Sarah made her choice. Come and get them, she called back. We'll be waiting. Ezra's smile was the coldest thing Sarah had ever seen. So be it. He lowered his hand and all hell broke loose. The first shot split the air like thunder, and Sarah dropped behind the barricade as splinters exploded from the wood beside her head. Around her, Coleman and his men returned fire, the crack of rifles echoing off the hillsides in a staccato rhythm that made her ears ring. Stay down, Coleman shouted, levering another round into his rifle. Don't waste ammunition. Pick your shots. Sarah raised her head just enough to peer over the barricade. Ezra's men had scattered, using rocks and scraggly trees for cover as they advanced up the hillside. They were moving in a coordinated pattern, half providing covering fire while the other half moved forward, then switching. These weren't just hired thugs. These were men who knew what they were doing. Sarah aimed at a figure darting between boulders and squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder, and she saw the man stumble and drop. Whether she'd hit him or he'd just taken cover, she couldn't tell. They're trying to flank us on the left, Tom Warren called from his position. He fired 3 quick shots, and Sarah heard someone scream. Henry, Sam, cover that approach. Coleman was in his element now, all hesitation gone, directing his men like a general. Don't let them get around us. The battle settled into a brutal rhythm. Vale's men would advance, get driven back by gunfire, regroup, and try again. Sarah's world narrowed to the simple mechanics of survival: load, aim, fire, duck, reload. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely work the rifle's lever, and gunpowder smoke burned her eyes and throat. From inside the mine office, she could hear Emmy crying. The sound cut through the chaos like a knife, and Sarah had to force herself not to run to the little girl. Martha would keep them safe. Martha would... An explosion rocked the hillside. Sarah's ears went dead, replaced by a high-pitched whine. Smoke and dust filled the air. Someone was screaming, but the sound came from very far away. She blinked, trying to clear her vision, and saw that part of their barricade had been blown apart. Dynamite. The bastards had dynamite. Fall back! Coleman's voice cut through the ringing in Sarah's ears. "To the office! Move!" They scrambled backward, firing as they went. Jack Morrison went down, clutching his leg, and Tom Warren dragged him toward the building. Another explosion tore through where they'd been standing seconds before, and Sarah felt the concussion wave lift her off her feet and slam her into the ground. She tasted blood and dirt. Her vision swam. Someone grabbed her arm and hauled her upright. Coleman, his face blackened with powder smoke, shouting something she couldn't hear. They ran. The mine office had never been meant to withstand an assault. The wooden walls were already splintering under the hail of gunfire. Martha had the children in the back corner, her own rifle raised, her face set in grim determination. Clara was holding Emmy, her hand clamped over the little girl's mouth to muffle her sobs. Ben had picked up a fallen revolver and was clutching it like a lifeline. "How many rounds do we have left?" Coleman demanded, slamming the door shut and dragging a desk in front of it. "Not enough," Pete Johnson said. His voice was matter-of-fact, resigned. "Maybe 20 between all of us. After that," he didn't need to finish. After that, they'd be defenseless. Sarah moved to the window and risked a glance outside. Ezra's men had taken their original position and were spreading out, surrounding the building. As she watched, 4 of them rushed forward carrying what looked like a battering ram. "They're coming through the door," she shouted. Coleman and Tom braced themselves against the desk barricade. "When it breaks, we go down fighting. Take as many of them as we can." Sarah looked at the children huddled in the corner, at Martha's fierce protective stance, at these men who'd risked everything to help strangers. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. Caleb was supposed to come back with marshals. Justice was supposed to win. The good guys were supposed to... The battering ram hit the door with the sound of cracking wood. Emmy screamed. The ram hit again, and the door hinges started to give. Sarah raised her rifle, took aim at where the door would open, and waited for the end. Then she heard it. Distant at first, but growing louder. The thunder of many horses moving fast, coming from the south. Through the broken window, Sarah saw Ezra's men turning, saw confusion ripple through their ranks. The battering ram fell silent. Someone shouted a warning, and then riders burst over the ridgeline, at least 30 of them, moving in formation, sunlight glinting off badges and rifle barrels. Federal marshals. And at their head, riding like the devil himself was on his heels, was Caleb Mercer. Sarah felt something break inside her chest, relief so intense it was painful. He'd made it. He'd actually made it. "Hold your fire!" A voice boomed across the hillside, amplified by authority and fury. "This is U.S. Marshal James Crawford. Drop your weapons and surrender immediately." For a moment, nothing happened. Ezra's men stood frozen, caught between their employer and the law, weighing their options. Then, one by one, rifles started hitting the ground. But not Ezra. Sarah saw him wheel his black horse around, saw him calculating distances, looking for an escape route. He dug his heels in, and the horse leaped forward, heading for the tree line. "Stop him!" Coleman burst from the mine office, his voice hoarse. "Don't let that son of a bitch get away!" But someone else was already moving. A rider broke from the marshal's formation, urging his horse to a full gallop, cutting across the hillside to intercept Ezra. It took Sarah a moment to recognize him through the dust and chaos. Deputy Martin, the same deputy who'd almost taken the children 2 nights ago, who'd almost helped kidnap 3 kids to satisfy his boss. But he wasn't helping Ezra now. Martin's horse was faster, younger, and he closed the distance quickly. Ezra saw him coming and drew his pistol, fired wildly without slowing. Martin didn't flinch, just kept coming, and as the 2 horses converged, he launched himself from the saddle in a tackle that would have made a barroom brawler proud. Both men hit the ground hard and rolled. Ezra came up first, his face bloody, his expensive clothes torn. He still had his gun. Martin was slower, dazed from the fall. He looked up just as Ezra raised the pistol and aimed at his head. The shot came from Sarah's rifle. She didn't remember raising it, didn't remember aiming, but she watched Ezra Vale stagger backward, watched him look down at the red stain spreading across his chest, watched him fall to his knees with an expression of absolute surprise. He stayed like that for a moment, kneeling in the dust like he was praying. Then he pitched forward onto his face and didn't move. Sarah lowered the rifle with shaking hands. She'd just killed a man, shot him in the back, ended a life. She waited for guilt, for horror, for regret. All she felt was tired.
The marshals swarmed over Ezra's men, disarming and shackling them with brutal efficiency. Marshal Crawford himself rode up to the mine office, his weathered face taking in the scene, the bullet holes, the blood, the children peering out from the doorway. "Miss Whitmore?" His voice was surprisingly gentle. "That's me?" "Marshal Crawford. Mr. Mercer briefed me on the situation. Looks like we got here just in time." "Little later would have been nice, but yes, thank you."
Crawford swung down from his horse and approached Ezra's body. He knelt, checked for a pulse, then stood and looked at Sarah. "This the man himself? Ezra Vale?" "That's him." "You the one who shot him?" Sarah met his eyes directly. "I am. He was about to kill Deputy Martin. I didn't see another option." Crawford studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Self-defense, defense of another. Justifiable under territorial law." He turned to his men. "Get the body covered. Round up the prisoners. I want statements from everyone here before nightfall." It was over. Just like that. 10 months of terror, 3 days of hell, and it ended with one bullet and a man dying in the dust. Sarah felt her legs start to give out. She grabbed the doorframe to steady herself, and suddenly Martha was there, strong arms supporting her, guiding her to sit on the building steps. "Easy now. You did good. You did so good. I killed him. You saved Martin's life. You ended a monster's reign. You protected those children." Martha's voice was firm. "Don't you dare feel guilty about that." Sarah looked across the clearing and saw Caleb running toward them, his face desperate with fear. The children saw him at the same moment and broke from the doorway, Emmy and Ben crashing into him with enough force to nearly knock him over. Clara followed more slowly, like she was afraid if she moved too fast he might disappear. He gathered all three of them close, his face buried in Emmy's hair, his shoulders shaking. Sarah couldn't hear what he was saying, but she didn't need to. She could see it in the way he held them, in the way they clung to him like he was the only solid thing in a world gone mad. Then he looked up and found Sarah's eyes. Across the dusty clearing, through the smoke and chaos and armed marshals, their gazes locked. She saw gratitude there, relief, and something else, something deeper that she wasn't ready to name. He mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." Sarah nodded, her throat too tight for speech, and looked away before the tears could start. The next few hours passed in a blur of official statements and organized chaos. The marshals documented everything: the gunfight, Ezra's attempt to escape, the circumstances of his death. They searched his saddlebags and found documents that made Marshal Crawford's eyebrows climb toward his hairline. "He was carrying evidence of his own crimes," Crawford said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Bank records, forged deeds, letters detailing bribes to judges. Why the hell would he keep all this?" "Control," Coleman said quietly. He'd been bandaging Jack Morrison's leg wound, but now he stood and approached. He kept records on everyone he corrupted, insurance in case they tried to turn on him, proof that if he went down, he'd take them all with him. "Well, they're all going down now." Crawford looked around at Ezra's captured men. Every single one of them. Sarah watched from the steps as the prisoners were loaded onto horses for the journey to the territorial capital. Some looked defiant. Others looked relieved, like they'd been waiting for this moment, waiting for someone to finally stop them from doing terrible things. As the sun started its descent toward the mountains, turning the sky orange and purple, the marshals prepared to head out. They'd camp halfway and reach the capital by tomorrow evening. Justice, however slow, was finally moving. Caleb approached Sarah as she was helping Martha pack up their makeshift medical supplies. His children were with Coleman, giving statements about what they'd witnessed. For the first time since she'd met him, Caleb looked like a man who could breathe. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. His voice was rough, exhausted. "I rode for 2 days straight, barely stopped to rest the horse. Kept thinking I'd get back and find—" He stopped, unable to finish. "But you didn't. We're all still here. Battered, but alive. You could have left, should have left. This wasn't your fight." Sarah thought about that. About the job advertisement she'd answered in St. Louis. About stepping off the wagon in Red Hollow with nothing but $20 and desperation. About how she'd planned to work here for a few months, save money, and move on to somewhere better. "Maybe it wasn't my fight at first," she said, "but it became mine the moment Emmy whispered her first words. The moment Clara showed me where the bread was kept. The moment Ben looked at me like maybe, just maybe, I was someone he could trust. She looked at Caleb directly. This stopped being about a job somewhere around the second day. After that, it was about family. Caleb's expression cracked, just for a moment, showing the depth of emotion underneath. You're staying then? After everything? Do you want me to? Miss Whitmore. Sarah, I can't imagine that house without you in it anymore. The children can't imagine it, and He stopped, struggling with words that didn't come easily. I'd like you to stay, not as an employee, as family, Sarah finished. I'd like that too. They stood there in the fading light, two people who'd survived something terrible together, and Sarah felt the last piece of herself that had been holding back finally settle into place. She'd been running for so long, from grief, from loss, from the fear that she'd always be alone. But here, in this brutal valley with these broken people, she'd found something worth standing still for, worth fighting for. Marshal Crawford approached, clearing his throat apologetically. Mr. Mercer, we need to head out before we lose the light. You'll need to come to the Capitol next week to give formal testimony. Bring the children if you can. Their statements will be crucial for the prosecution. We'll be there, Caleb said. And Miss Whitmore, Crawford turned to Sarah, the territorial governor is going to want to meet you. Word's going to spread about what happened here, about a woman who stood up to one of the most powerful men in the valley and won. That's the kind of story people need to hear. Sarah felt her stomach twist. I'm not a hero, Marshal. I just did what needed doing. That's exactly what makes you one. Crawford tipped his hat. Take care of yourself, Miss Whitmore. Take care of this family. They're lucky to have you. The marshals rode out as the last light drained from the sky, taking their prisoners and their evidence and the body of Ezra Vale. Sarah watched them go and felt the tension that had been holding her upright for 3 days finally release. She swayed on her feet. Caleb caught her before she fell, his arms strong and steady. Easy. When's the last time you slept? I don't remember. Then let's get you home. Home. The word sounded foreign and perfect all at once. They made their way back to the ranch in the dark, a ragged procession of exhausted survivors. Martha and her men insisted on escorting them, claiming they wanted to make sure no remnants of Vale's operation tried anything stupid. But Sarah suspected they just wanted to see this through to the end, wanted to know that the family they'd fought for made it safely back where they belonged. The ranch house was exactly as they'd left it, doors broken, furniture overturned, windows shattered. But it was standing, and it was theirs. Caleb got the children settled while Sarah and Martha began the overwhelming task of putting the house back together. They worked in silence, too tired for conversation, sweeping up broken glass and righting furniture by lamplight. It was Clara who finally broke the quiet. She appeared in the doorway, Emmy's hand in hers, Ben hovering behind. Sarah? Her voice was small. Can we help? Sarah looked at these 3 children who'd been through hell and were still offering to help, who'd lost their mother, nearly lost their father, and had every reason to curl up in a corner and never come out. But here they were, ready to rebuild. Yeah, Sarah said, her voice thick. Yeah, you can help. They worked together through the night, Sarah and Martha and Caleb and 3 children who refused to be broken. By the time the sun rose, the house wasn't perfect. It wasn't even close. But it was clean. It was functional, and most importantly, it felt like a place where people could start over. Martha left as dawn broke, promising to check on them in a few days. Her men had already gone, melting back into the valley to spread the news that Ezra Vale was dead and his reign was over. Sarah stood on the porch and watched Martha's wagon disappear down the road, feeling the weight of everything that had happened settle over her like a blanket. She should feel victorious, relieved, happy. Instead, she just felt hollow. Sarah? Emmy's small voice came from behind her. Are you sad? Sarah turned and found all 3 children standing there, watching her with those 2 knowing eyes. Not sad, sweetheart, just tired. Mama used to get that look, Claire said quietly, after she'd been brave for too long, like she'd used up all her brave and didn't have any left. That's a good way to put it. Mama said the brave comes back. If you rest and let people take care of you for a while, the brave always comes back. Sarah felt tears start to well up, tried to blink them back. Failed. She sank down onto the porch steps, and Emmy immediately climbed into her lap. Clara sat beside her, leaning against her shoulder. Ben stood awkwardly for a moment, then sat on her other side, his head resting against her arm. They sat there as the sun climbed higher, four people who'd survived something terrible, holding each other up, because that's what family did. Caleb found them like that an hour later. He didn't say anything, just sat down on the step below and added his presence to their small circle of survivors. "I talked to Marshal Crawford before he left," he said eventually. "Ezra's records are going to bring down half the corrupt officials in the territory. Judges, sheriffs, land office clerks, everyone he bribed or blackmailed over the years. It's going to be a bloodbath." "Good," Clara said fiercely. "They deserve it." "They do. And there's something else. Elizabeth's father's real will, the one that proves Ezra forged the probate documents, it's going to be honored. That means the children's inheritance is restored. All of it." Caleb looked at his kids, his expression complex. "You're going to be wealthy. In a few years. When the trust matures." "Will we still live here?" Ben asked, speaking for the first time since the night before. "On the ranch? If that's what you want. This is your home. Money doesn't change that." "I want to stay," Emmy said firmly. "I want to stay here with Pa and Sarah and Clara and Ben. Forever." Sarah's heart clenched. Forever. Such a big word for such a small girl. "Then that's what we'll do," Caleb said. "We'll stay here. We'll rebuild. We'll make this place into something your mother would be proud of." Over the next week, life slowly returned to something approaching normal. The valley was in chaos. Judge Harrow had fled before the marshals could arrest him. Peterson had tried to hang himself in his cell, and at least a dozen prominent citizens were facing charges ranging from bribery to accessory to murder. But at the ranch, there was a strange kind of peace. Sarah threw herself into the work of restoration. She fixed windows and patched walls and scrubbed floors until her hands were raw. The children helped, slowly coming back to life like plants after a long drought. Emmy started talking more, her vocabulary expanding daily. Ben began to laugh again, and Clara, fierce, protective Clara, started to act like a child for the first time in months, playing and teasing and letting herself be young. Caleb worked from dawn until dusk, repairing fences and mending the barn roof and handling the dozens of legal matters that kept cropping up. But Sarah noticed he was different too, lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He smiled more, joked with the children. And sometimes, late in the evening when the kids were in bed, he'd sit with Sarah on the porch and they'd talk about everything and nothing. Those conversations never went anywhere romantic, didn't need to. There was something deeper forming between them, a bond forged in crisis, tested in fire, and emerging stronger than either of them had expected. One evening, about 10 days after Ezra's death, Sarah was finishing dinner cleanup when Caleb appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Walk with me?" She dried her hands and followed him outside. The evening was cool, the sky painted in shades of purple and gold. They walked in comfortable silence toward the small cemetery plot behind the house. Just a few markers, including one for Elizabeth Mercer. Sarah had never been here before, had felt like it wasn't her place somehow. But Caleb led her straight to Elizabeth's grave, where someone had planted a lilac bush that was just beginning to bloom. "I should have brought you here sooner," he said. "Should have told you more about her, but I couldn't." His voice broke. "I couldn't talk about her without seeing her fall, without seeing the blood and knowing I'd failed to protect her." "You didn't fail." "I should have known, should have seen what Ezra was planning, should have—" "Stop." Sarah turned to face him. "You loved your wife. You trusted her brother because she wanted to believe he could change. You thought you had time to figure out what was wrong. None of that is failure, Caleb. That's just being human." He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the grave. Then, "She would have liked you, Elizabeth. She was always drawn to people who didn't back down, who fought for what was right, even when it was hard. That was you, the moment you faced down Ezra's men with nothing but a borrowed rifle and sheer stubbornness. I was terrified. So was she. Every day. But she did it anyway." Caleb looked at Sarah, and in the fading light his eyes were soft. "I brought you here because I wanted you to know. Elizabeth would have wanted you here, would have wanted you with our children, would have been grateful that someone like you found us when we needed it most." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. "I didn't find you. You found me. That advertisement in the paper, the job offer,
If you hadn't posted it, I'd still be in St. Louis, probably starving or worse. Then I guess we found each other, when we both needed it most.
They stood there as darkness fell, two people standing over a grave, acknowledging the ghost that would always be part of their story. Sarah felt no jealousy, no resentment, just gratitude that Elizabeth Mercer had lived, had loved, had fought. Because without her, these children wouldn't exist. And without these children, Sarah would never have found her way home.
I should tell you something, Caleb said suddenly, about the money. Elizabeth's inheritance, it's substantial, more than I ever imagined, more than we'll need for the ranch. I've been thinking, he paused, gathering his thoughts. Elizabeth always wanted to help women who had nowhere else to go. Women fleeing bad situations, women with children and no resources. She talked about starting a refuge someday, a place where they could be safe while they figured out their next step.
That sounds like her, from what Clara's told me. I want to do it. I want to use the money to turn this ranch into that refuge, build some additional cabins, hire staff, create a place where women like... He stopped, looking at Sarah. Women like you, who've lost everything, can land safely, can catch their breath, and plan their next move without being desperate. Sarah felt something warm bloom in her chest. She'd love that. So would I.
I was hoping you'd help me run it. You've got experience managing a household, dealing with difficult situations. And more importantly, you understand what it's like to have nothing, to be vulnerable. He met her eyes directly. I can't think of anyone better suited to help women in that position. Yes, Sarah said without hesitation. Yes, I'll help you. They walked back to the house in the gathering dark, and Sarah felt the pieces of her life finally clicking into place. This was what she'd been searching for without knowing it, not just a job or a roof over her head, but a purpose, a place where she belonged. People who needed her not because she was convenient, but because she understood their pain and could help them through it. The next morning, Sheriff Coleman rode up with news. The territorial governor was coming to Red Hollow next week. He wanted to meet the people who'd brought down Ezra Vale, wanted to personally thank them for their courage. He's also bringing reporters, Coleman said, looking apologetic. From Denver, from Santa Fe, even one from San Francisco. What happened here? It's big news. Woman standing up to corrupt banker, bringing down an entire network of corruption. People want to hear about it. Sarah's stomach sank. I don't want to be famous. I just want to live quietly and help Caleb with the refuge. I know, but sometimes we don't get to choose how our stories are told. Coleman shifted in his saddle. For what it's worth, I think it's good that people hear about this, about you. There are women all over the territory living in fear of men like Ezra. If they hear about what you did, maybe they'll find the courage to stand up too. He was right. Sarah knew he was right. But she also knew that once her story got out, her quiet life at the ranch would be over. People would show up wanting to meet her, wanting to hear the details firsthand, wanting to make her into some kind of symbol. We'll get through it, Caleb said after Coleman left. The children and I will be right there beside you. And once the attention dies down, we'll get back to the work that matters. The governor's visit was exactly as overwhelming as Sarah had feared. He arrived with an entourage of officials and reporters, all asking questions and scribbling notes. Sarah answered as simply as she could, giving credit to Caleb and Coleman and Martha and everyone else who'd helped. But the reporters kept circling back to her, the mysterious woman who'd appeared from nowhere and changed everything. One reporter, a sharp-eyed woman from Denver, cornered Sarah on the porch after the formal speeches were done. Miss Whitmore, there's something people want to know. Why did you stay? You'd only been here 3 days. You had no real connection to this family. Why risk your life for them? Sarah thought about all the ways she could answer that. Could talk about duty or conscience or the simple fact that running away was no longer in her nature. But in the end, she went with the truth. Because Emmy called me by my name. Because Clara trusted me with her mother's secrets. Because Ben looked at me like maybe I was someone who'd stick around. Sarah looked toward the house, where the children were watching from a window. I stayed because nobody had ever needed me like that before, and I couldn't walk away from people who made me feel like I mattered. The reporter wrote that down, her expression thoughtful. You've become quite the symbol, you know, for women who feel powerless, women in bad situations who think they can't fight back. I'm not a symbol. I'm just someone who got tired of running. Sometimes that's all it takes. Getting tired of running, deciding to stand and fight no matter the odds.
The reporter closed her notebook. Thank you, Miss Whitmore, for the interview and for what you did. My sister was in a situation similar to yours. No money, no options, desperate. She didn't have a Caleb Mercer to take her in. She ended up... The reporter's voice caught. Well, she didn't survive it. But maybe if she'd heard a story like yours, maybe if she'd known it was possible to stand up and fight, things would have been different. Emmett won't sustain. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. I'm sorry about your sister. Me too, but her story doesn't have to be every woman's story. Yours proves that. The reporter stood, extending her hand. Good luck with the refuge. I think it's going to help a lot of people. As the reporter walked away, Sarah felt the weight of what she'd become settle over her. Not just a housekeeper or a survivor, but an example. A story that would travel across the territory, giving hope to women who'd lost it. It was more responsibility than she'd ever wanted. But then again, she'd never wanted to be the person who shot a man in the back, or faced down armed kidnappers, or stood between 3 children and the monster who wanted to destroy them. Sometimes life didn't ask what you wanted. It just gave you what you could handle and trusted you to figure it out. That evening, after the governor and his entourage had left, Sarah sat on the porch with the children. Emmy was in her lap, half asleep. Clara and Ben flanked her on either side. Inside, she could hear Caleb and Coleman discussing the legal details of transferring Elizabeth's inheritance to the refuge fund. Sarah? Claire's voice was quiet. Are you going to leave now that Uncle Ezra's gone and the danger is over? Do you want me to leave? No, Clara struggled with the words. You came here for a job, and now the job is different, bigger. What if you decide it's too much? What if you want to go somewhere easier? Sarah looked at this girl who'd been forced to grow up too fast, who'd lost so much, who was still afraid to trust that good things could last. Clara, listen to me. I'm not leaving. Not now, not next week, not next year. This is my home now. You're my family. And when this refuge opens, I'm going to help every woman who comes through here find what I found. A place where they matter, where they're safe, where they can build a new life. Sarah met Clara's eyes directly. I'm done running. This is where I stand. Clara's face crumpled, and she buried her head against Sarah's shoulder. Sarah held her while she cried, held Ben when he started crying too, held Emmy, who'd woken up and immediately started crying because everyone else was. They sat there in a tangle of tears and relief and grief that was finally being processed after months of holding it in. And when Caleb emerged to find them all crying on the porch, he didn't ask what was wrong. He just sat down and added his solid presence to their circle, and they held each other while the stars came out overhead. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Sarah found herself back at Elizabeth's grave. She didn't know why she'd come, hadn't planned it, but her feet had carried her here anyway. She stood there in the moonlight, looking at the simple headstone, and finally found the words she'd been searching for. I'll take care of them, she said quietly. Your children, your husband. I'll make sure they're safe and loved and know they matter. And I'll help other women find the same safety you wanted for them. I promise you that. For whatever it's worth, I promise. The night wind rustled through the lilac bush, carrying its sweet scent. Sarah stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked back to the house where light spilled from the windows and her family was waiting. She'd come to Red Hollow with nothing but $20 and desperation. She'd found a war, fought in it, and somehow survived. And now she was building something that mattered, not just for herself, but for everyone who came after. It wasn't the life she'd imagined, but it was the life she'd earned. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Sarah Whitmore felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The first snow came early that year, arriving in late October with a silence that felt like the valley was holding its breath. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, watching fat white flakes drift past the glass, and thought about how different the world looked now compared to 4 months ago when she'd stepped off that wagon with nothing but desperation and $20. Behind her, Emmy was chattering away to Ben about the snowman they were going to build, her voice bright and full of plans. Clara was helping Caleb review architectural drawings for the new cabins they'd be constructing come spring. The kitchen smelled like fresh bread and coffee, and the house felt warm in a way that had nothing to do with the fire in the stove. Sarah? Caleb's voice pulled her from her thoughts. You got a minute? She turned to find him standing in the doorway, those gray eyes that had been so cold when she first met him now carrying something that looked almost like nervousness. Course. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. He glanced at the children, then back at her. Walk with me? They bundled up against the cold and stepped out onto the porch. The snow was already accumulating, covering the scars in the yard where Ezra's men had torn up the ground. Covering the past, Sarah thought, making everything clean and new. They walked in silence toward the cemetery, their boots crunching in the fresh snow. Sarah had been coming here regularly over the past few months, talking to Elizabeth like she was an old friend, telling her about the children's progress, about the plans for the refuge, about how Caleb was slowly learning to smile again. When they reached Elizabeth's grave, Caleb stood there for a long moment, staring at the lilac bush now bare of leaves, but somehow still beautiful in its stark winter form. I've been thinking about something, he said finally, about what happens next, for all of us. The refuge opens in spring. We've already got 3 women lined up who need not that. Well, not just that. He turned to face her, and Sarah saw determination mixed with fear in his expression. I'm talking about us. You and me and the children. About what we are to each other. Sarah's heart started beating faster. Caleb, let me finish, please. He took a breath. You came here as an employee, became family, saved our lives. Helped me remember what it felt like to have hope again, and somewhere in all of that you became... He stopped, struggling with the words. You became the first thing I think about when I wake up, and the last thing before I sleep. You became the person I want to talk to about everything and nothing. You became home. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. You're going to make me cry. I'm not done yet. A small smile crossed his face. Elizabeth told me once, near the end, that if anything happened to her, I shouldn't spend my life alone. She said I was the kind of man who needed someone to fight beside, someone to build things with. She said loving someone else wouldn't mean I loved her less. His voice went rough. I didn't believe her then. Thought I'd never want anyone else. But she was right. She was always right. Caleb, Sarah Whitmore, I'm asking you to marry me. Not because the children need a mother, though they do. Not because the refuge needs someone to run it, though it does. But because I need you. Because you make me want to be better than I am. Because when I picture the rest of my life, you're in every single moment of it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. This was my grandmother's. It's not fancy, but it's real. Like us. Like what we've built here together. Sarah looked at the ring, then at Caleb, then past him to where she could see the ranch house with its warm lights and the children visible through the windows. She thought about the woman she'd been 4 months ago, scared, desperate, running from a life that had offered her nothing but cruelty and disappointment. And she thought about who she'd become, someone who stood her ground, who fought for people she loved, who'd found the courage to stop running and start building. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Caleb's face transformed, grief and worry giving way to something that looked like joy. He slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, and Sarah felt the weight of it, not heavy, just present. A reminder that she belonged somewhere now, to someone. He kissed her then, gentle and careful, like she was something precious. And maybe she was. Maybe they both were. 2 broken people who'd found each other in the wreckage and decided to build something new. When they finally pulled apart, Sarah rested her forehead against his. Should we tell the children? They already know. What? Caleb laughed, and it was the most beautiful sound Sarah had ever heard. Clara figured it out weeks ago. She's been not so subtly hinting that you should stay forever. Emmy's been asking when you're going to be her real mama instead of her almost mama. And Ben, he shook his head fondly. Ben asked me 2 days ago if I was going to marry you or if I was too scared. And what did you tell him? That I was terrified, but that the best things in life are usually terrifying. They walked back to the house hand in hand, and when they stepped inside, 3 faces turned toward them with expressions that ranged from hopeful to knowing. So? Clara asked, trying to sound casual and failing completely. Did you ask her? I asked her. And? Sarah held up her hand, showing the ring. I said yes. Emmy's scream of delight could probably be heard in the next county. She She launched herself at Sarah with enough force to nearly knock them both over, followed immediately by Ben and then Clara, who was trying very hard not to cry and failing spectacularly. They stood there in the warm kitchen, a tangle of arms and tears and laughter, and Sarah felt something she'd thought was lost forever, the absolute certainty that she was loved, not for what she could do or what she could provide, but just for being herself. That night, after the children had finally gone to bed, still talking excitedly about the wedding and what they'd wear and whether there would be cake, Sarah found herself alone with Caleb in the kitchen, washing dishes in comfortable silence. "I want to do it soon," Caleb said. "The wedding, before winter really sets in. Is that too fast? After everything we've been through, nothing feels too fast." Sarah handed him a plate to dry. "But I want the children involved. This isn't just about us. It's about becoming a real family." "They already see you as family." "I know. But I want them to be part of making it official, part of choosing this, choosing us." She paused. "And I want to do it at Elizabeth's grave, with the lilac bush. I want her to be part of it too." Caleb stopped drying mid-motion, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded slowly. "She'd like that. Being part of bringing you into the family she left behind." They planned the wedding for 3 weeks out, right before Thanksgiving. Small and simple, just family and the few friends who'd stood by them when it mattered. Martha Reed, Sheriff Coleman, the men who'd fought beside them at the mining camp. No fancy clothes or elaborate ceremony, just two people promising to stand together, witnessed by the people who'd helped them survive. The news spread through Red Hollow faster than wildfire. Some people were happy about it, thought it was romantic, a story of hope rising from tragedy. Others were scandalized, barely 6 months since Elizabeth died, and Caleb was already remarrying. Sarah heard the whispers when she went to town for supplies, saw the judgment in certain faces. She didn't care. Let them talk. Let them judge. She'd survived far worse than small-town gossip. But one afternoon, about a week before the wedding, Sarah found herself confronted by a woman she'd never met before. Older, well-dressed, with Elizabeth's eyes. "You're Sarah Whitmore." "I am." "I'm Margaret Reed, Elizabeth's aunt, Martha's sister." The woman's expression was difficult to read. "Martha told me about you, about what you did for my niece's children, about what you survived." Sarah braced herself for judgment, for accusations that she was trying to replace Elizabeth. But Margaret surprised her. "Thank you for loving them, for fighting for them, for being what they needed when they needed it most." Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Elizabeth would have been grateful, more than grateful. She'd have loved you for it. I never met her, but I feel like I know her through her children, through Caleb. She was the best of us, and she died trying to protect the people she loved from a monster." Margaret reached out and took Sarah's hand. "Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for bringing light back into that house, for giving those children something to smile about again. Elizabeth would have wanted that. She told me once, near the end, that if anything happened to her, she hoped Caleb would find someone who'd love her babies as much as she did, someone who'd be strong enough to protect them. I'm not that strong. I was just stubborn enough not to quit." "Stubborn, strong, same thing, in the end." Margaret squeezed her hand. "I'll be at the wedding, and I'll be proud to call you family." She walked away, leaving Sarah standing in the street with tears streaming down her face. She'd been so afraid of being seen as a replacement, as someone trying to erase Elizabeth's memory. But she was starting to understand that wasn't how it worked. Elizabeth would always be the children's mother, would always be Caleb's first love. Sarah wasn't erasing her. She was continuing her work, building on the foundation Elizabeth had laid. That was worth doing, worth fighting for. The night before the wedding, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in her small room, staring at the ceiling, and thought about how much had changed since that first night when she'd climbed these stairs with nothing but fear and determination. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Sarah?" Clara's voice, barely audible. "Can I come in?" "Of course." Clara slipped inside, closing the door behind her. In the moonlight streaming through the window, she looked younger than her 11 years, vulnerable in a way she rarely allowed herself to be anymore. "I'm scared," she said quietly. "Of what, sweetheart?" "That this is going to change things. That you marrying Pa means everything's going to be different. That maybe," her voice cracked, That maybe you'll love him more than us, that we'll become less important. Sarah sat up and patted the bed beside her. Clara climbed up, and Sarah pulled her close. Listen to me. You want to know why I'm marrying your father? Because you love him.
Yes, but you know what I loved first? You three. You and Ben and Emmy. I fell in love with you before I even liked your father. You were the reason I stayed, the reason I fought, the reason I found the courage to stop running. Sarah tilted Clara's face up to meet her eyes. Your pa and I, we're choosing to build a life together. But you children aren't part of that life. You are that life. You're the center of everything we're building, and that's never going to change. Promise?
I promise. You're stuck with me now, Clara. For better or worse, I'm your mother. Maybe not the one who gave birth to you, but the one who chose you, who'll keep choosing you every single day for the rest of my life. Clara's face crumpled, and she buried herself against Sarah's shoulder. I miss her. Mama, I know I'm supposed to be happy about the wedding, and I am, but I also miss her so much it hurts. I know. And it's okay to feel both things at once, love and grief, happiness and sadness. They can all exist together. Your mama would understand that. They sat there in the darkness, and gradually Emmy and Ben appeared too, drawn by some sibling instinct that something important was happening. They all ended up piled on Sarah's narrow bed, a tangle of limbs and hearts, and Sarah held them while they cried and laughed and talked about their mother and their fears and their hopes for tomorrow. By the time dawn broke, they'd all fallen asleep like that. And when Caleb came looking for them in the morning, he found them still there. 4 people who'd become a family somewhere between the terror and the healing. The wedding day arrived cold and clear. They gathered at the cemetery in the early afternoon, just 10 people standing in the snow beside Elizabeth's grave. Sarah wore a simple blue dress that Martha had helped her make. Caleb wore his best clothes, freshly mended. The children stood between them, holding hands. Sheriff Coleman officiated, having gotten himself deputized as a justice of the peace for the occasion. His words were simple and honest, talking about commitment and partnership and choosing to build something together in the face of loss. But it was the children who made the ceremony something special. Clara had written vows that they all 3 recited, promising to be a family, to support each other, to remember Elizabeth while making space for new love. Emmy held Sarah's hand the entire time, her small face serious with the weight of the moment. Ben stood straight and proud, like he was guarding something precious. And when Coleman finally pronounced them married, when Caleb kissed Sarah gently while the small gathering applauded, Sarah looked down at Elizabeth's grave and felt a strange sense of peace, like she'd been given a blessing from someone she'd never met, but would be forever grateful to. The gathering moved back to the house for a simple meal. Martha had made a cake. Nothing fancy, just good and sweet and enough for everyone. They ate and laughed and told stories, and for the first time in months, the house felt truly alive. As the sun started to set, turning the snow-covered valley orange and gold, Sarah found herself standing on the porch alone for a moment. She looked out at the land that was now her home, at the place where she'd nearly died and instead found a reason to live. Mrs. Mercer, Caleb's voice came from behind her, warm with affection. How's it feel? Strange. Good. Right. She turned to face him. I never thought I'd end up here. Never imagined a life like this was possible for someone like me. Someone like you? Someone with nothing. Someone who'd been thrown away by everyone who was supposed to care about her. You were never nothing, Sarah. You just hadn't found the place where you could become everything yet. He joined her at the railing. You know what I learned from all this? From losing Elizabeth, from nearly losing the children, from almost losing everything? What? That family isn't about blood or history or even love, really. It's about who stands beside you when everything's falling apart. Who fights for you when you can't fight for yourself. Who chooses you over and over again, even when you can't see anything in yourself worth choosing. He looked at her directly. You did that for us. You stood, you fought, you chose us when we were at our worst. And now I get to spend the rest of my life choosing you back. Sarah felt tears start again. Happy tears this time, healing tears, and didn't bother to wipe them away. I'm going to cry at everything now, aren't I? I've turned into a watering pot. You've turned into someone who lets herself feel things instead of running from them. That's not weakness, Sarah. That's courage. They stood there as the stars began to appear, and Sarah thought about the long, winding road that had brought her here. The pain and loss, the desperate choices. The moment she'd stepped off that wagon in Red Hollow and decided that maybe, just maybe, she'd try one more time to build a life. She'd had no idea what she was walking into, no idea that she'd find a war or that she'd discover she had the strength to fight in it. No idea that 3 broken children and a grief-stricken man would become more important to her than her own survival. But that was the thing about life, Sarah realized. You couldn't plan for the moments that changed everything. Couldn't prepare for the people who'd walk into your story and rewrite the ending. All you could do was show up, be honest, and hope that when the hard moments came, you'd find the courage to stand your ground. She'd done that. Against all odds, against her own fears, she'd stood her ground. And she'd won. The winter that followed was the happiest Sarah had ever known. She and Caleb fell into an easy partnership, running the ranch and planning the refuge. The children thrived, growing and healing in ways that seemed miraculous after the darkness they'd survived. Emmy's vocabulary expanded daily, her curiosity about the world returning. Ben started helping Caleb with the heavier ranch work, his confidence growing with every task he mastered. And Clara, fierce, protective Clara, slowly allowed herself to be a child again, playing in the snow and laughing without looking over her shoulder. In early December, the legal proceedings finally concluded. Judge Harrow had been caught trying to flee to Mexico and was awaiting trial. Peterson had given up names of everyone involved in Ezra's network, trying to buy himself a lighter sentence. And the territory's new attorney general, a woman named Rebecca Stone, who'd built her career fighting corruption, was systematically dismantling every crooked deal Ezra had put together over the past 20 years. Elizabeth's inheritance was fully restored to the children's trust. The amount was staggering, nearly $50,000 once all the embezzled funds were recovered. More money than Sarah had ever imagined existed in one place. "It's too much," she said to Caleb when they reviewed the final accounting. "We can't possibly need this much." "We don't, but others will." Caleb looked at the numbers with determined eyes. "We're going to build something that lasts, something that helps people for generations." Elizabeth would have wanted that. They started construction on the refuge in February, hiring workers from surrounding towns and bringing in supplies from as far away as Denver. The design was thoughtful, small cabins that could house women and children, a large central building for meals and gatherings, a schoolroom where children could be educated, a workshop where women could learn trades. Not charity that made people feel small, but support that helped them rebuild their lives with dignity. Sarah threw herself into the work with an intensity that surprised even her. She interviewed potential staff, developed policies, reached out to women's groups in other territories. And slowly, carefully, she began to share her own story. Not all of it, not the parts that still hurt too much, but enough that other women could see themselves in her journey, could see that survival was possible, that building a new life after losing everything wasn't just a dream. The first woman arrived in April, brought by a pastor from 2 counties over. Her name was Anne. She was 19 years old, and she had a 6-month-old baby and a black eye that was just starting to fade. She stood in the yard looking at the cabins like she couldn't believe they were real. "This is for us?" Her voice was barely audible. "We can really stay here?" "As long as you need," Sarah said. "No judgment, no strings. You work on healing, on figuring out your next step. We provide shelter and food and safety. That's the deal." Anne started crying. "I ain't got money. Can't pay you nothing for this." "Don't need money. Just need you to help yourself and maybe, when you're ready, help the next woman who comes through scared and desperate." Anne stayed for 3 months. In that time, she learned to read, learned basic bookkeeping, and gradually the fear in her eyes faded to something that looked like hope. When she left, it was to take a job at a general store in a town 50 miles away, where her husband would never think to look for her. She left her baby with Sarah for one last hug, and Sarah felt the weight of what they'd built together. This was it. This was the purpose she'd been searching for. Not just surviving, but helping others survive. Not just building her own life, but creating space for other women to build theirs. By summer, they had 5 women in residence and 2 more on waiting lists. Martha Reed had joined them full-time, managing the day-to-day operations with an efficiency that left Sarah in awe. Clara, now 12 and frighteningly mature, had appointed herself the unofficial teacher for the younger children who came through. Ben and Emmy treated each new arrival like extended family, making them feel welcome in ways that broke Sarah's heart and rebuilt it at the same time. One evening in late July, Sarah and Caleb sat on the porch watching the children play with some of the refuge residents' kids. The valley was green and alive, so different from the dust and death of the previous summer. "You know what's strange?" Caleb said. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for the other shoe to drop, like happiness this complete can't possibly last." "I know what you mean. I wake up sometimes in a panic thinking I'm back in that boarding house in St. Louis, that this was all a dream. But it's not. We're really here. We really built this." He reached for her hand, "and we're going to keep building it, for as long as we have." Sarah squeezed his hand, watching Emmy teach a new little girl how to catch fireflies in the gathering dusk. "She would be proud, wouldn't she, Elizabeth, of what we did with her dream? She'd be proud of you for taking her children, her husband, her half-formed dream, and turning it all into something real and lasting." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "I think about her less now, not because I love her less, but because the grief doesn't consume everything anymore. Is that wrong?" "No, that's healing. That's exactly what she'd want for you." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd been forged in fire and emerged stronger, watching their family grow and thrive. And Sarah felt a bone-deep contentment that she'd never experienced before. This was home. This was purpose. This was everything she'd been searching for without knowing it. The years that followed brought changes, as years always do. Clara grew into a fierce young woman with her mother's courage and her father's stubborn determination. She left for college in Denver at 17, planning to study law so she could help women legally escape dangerous situations. Ben took over more of the ranch operations, discovering he had a gift for animal husbandry and land management. Emmy, surprisingly, became the refuge's most effective advocate, traveling to nearby towns to speak about what the program offered. Her sweet face and earnest words opening doors that might otherwise have stayed closed. Sarah and Caleb's marriage deepened into something solid and real, built on shared purpose and hard-won trust. They had their fights, loud ones sometimes, about money or priorities or how to handle difficult situations, but they always came back to each other, always remembered that they were on the same side. And the refuge grew. By its 5th year, they'd helped over 60 women and nearly 100 children. Some stayed for weeks, some for months. Some moved on to other towns, other lives. Others stayed nearby, becoming part of the valley's fabric, contributing to the community that had saved them. Sarah watched it all with quiet pride, never quite able to believe she'd been part of building something so important. But the women who came through never forgot her. They remembered the woman who'd stood up to a corrupt banker and won, who'd risked everything to protect 3 children who weren't hers, who'd looked at her own painful past and decided to transform it into something that helped others. 10 years after she'd first stepped off that wagon in Red Hollow, Sarah found herself standing at Elizabeth's grave again. The lilac bush had grown tall and full, its purple flowers perfuming the air. The cemetery had expanded, more families moving into the valley, more lives being lived. But Elizabeth's spot remained the most visited, the most tended. Her legacy lived on in every woman the refuge helped, every child who found safety there. Sarah knelt beside the grave and did something she hadn't done in years. She spoke out loud to Elizabeth, the woman she'd never met but felt she knew intimately. "I hope you're not mad," she said quietly, "about me marrying Caleb, about taking your place in your children's lives. I never meant to replace you, could never replace you. You'll always be their mother, the one who gave them life and loved them first. I'm just—" She paused, searching for the right words. "I'm the one who came after, who got to continue your work and raise your beautiful children and build your dream into reality. And I've tried to do it in a way that would make you proud." The wind rustled through the lilac bush, carrying its sweet scent. Sarah stood, brushing dirt from her knees, and looked out over the valley. From here she could see the ranch house, the refuge cabins, the barn Ben had rebuilt from scratch, could see the life they'd all built together from the ashes of tragedy. And she understood something in that moment that she'd been moving toward for 10 years. Life wasn't about avoiding pain or grief or loss. You couldn't run from those things forever. She'd tried and failed. Life was about standing in the wreckage of what you'd lost and deciding to build something new anyway. About taking the shattered pieces and creating something even more beautiful than what came before. That's what she'd done here. What they'd all done together. They'd taken murder and corruption and nearly unbearable grief, and they'd transformed it into healing and safety and hope. That was Elizabeth's real legacy. Not the money or the children or even the refuge itself. It was the lesson she'd lived and died teaching, that love was worth fighting for even when the fight was hard. Especially when the fight was hard. Sarah walked back to the house as the sun began to set. Inside, she could hear Caleb and Emmy arguing good-naturedly about something, could smell dinner cooking, could feel the warm pulse of life being lived. She paused on the porch, taking it all in, letting herself feel the full weight of her gratitude. She'd come to Red Hollow as a woman who'd given up on everything except surviving one more day. She'd leave this world, someday, hopefully far in the future, as a woman who'd learned that survival wasn't enough. You had to live. You had to fight. You had to stand your ground and refuse to let the bastards win. That was the real story here. Not that she'd been brave or heroic or special, but that she'd been broken and desperate and terrified, and she'd found the strength to keep going anyway, to stand up when it would have been easier to stay down, to fight when running would have been safer. And in doing so, she discovered something profound, that you didn't need to be perfect or undamaged or fearless to change the world. You just needed to be stubborn enough to show up, honest enough to admit when you were scared, and brave enough to stand anyway. That was a lesson worth teaching, a story worth telling, a life worth living. Sarah stepped inside to her family, to her purpose, to her hard-won peace, and for the first time in her entire life, she felt completely, absolutely home. Years later, when she was very old and her grandchildren asked her to tell them the story of how she came to Red Hollow, Sarah would smile and think about all the ways she could tell it. She could focus on the drama, the gunfight, the murder, the corrupt banker. She could make it an adventure story, full of narrow escapes and heroic stands. But she never told it that way. Instead, she told them about a woman who'd lost everything and found the courage to try one more time. About 3 children who'd been broken by grief and learned to heal. About a man who'd been crushed by loss and discovered he could love again. About a community that came together to fight injustice when it would have been easier to look away. She told them that bravery wasn't about not being afraid. It was about being terrified and doing the hard thing anyway. She told them that family wasn't always about blood. Sometimes it was about who stood beside you when everything fell apart. She told them that the best things in life often came from the worst moments, if you were willing to stand your ground and fight for them. And she told them that they carried Elizabeth Mercer's courage in their veins, even if they'd never met her. Because courage wasn't something you inherited from genetics. It was something you learned from the people who loved you, something you passed down through stories and examples, and the simple act of refusing to give up when things got hard. That was Elizabeth's gift to Sarah, and Sarah's gift to her children and their children and everyone who came after. The story of the woman no one wanted who became the woman everyone needed, who stood up to power and won not through perfection or fearlessness, but through sheer stubborn determination to protect the people she loved. In the end, that was all any of them could do. Stand their ground, fight for what mattered, build something worth building, even when, especially when, the world tried to tear it down. That was the real legacy of Red Hollow. And it was a legacy that would echo through generations, carried forward by everyone who heard the story and found in it the courage to face their own battles. Sarah lived to be 83 years old. When she died, peacefully in her sleep with Caleb holding her hand, the valley mourned. They buried her beside Elizabeth, the 2 women who'd shaped the Mercer family finally resting side by side. And at the funeral, more than 200 women stood in the cemetery. Women who'd passed through the refuge over the decades, whose lives had been changed by Sarah's stubborn refusal to let them fall through the cracks. They told their stories, one after another. Stories of escape and healing and transformation. Stories of finding strength they didn't know they had. Stories of learning that they deserved safety and dignity and love. And in every story, Sarah was there. Not as a savior or a saint, but as a fellow survivor who'd extended a hand and said, "I've been where you are, and I'm here to tell you that you can make it through. Let me show you how." That was her true epitaph. Not the dramatic moments of fighting corruption or facing down gunmen, but the quiet daily work of helping women rebuild their lives, one moment, one meal, one act of kindness at a time. The refuge continues to this day, run by Sarah and Caleb's grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The cabins have been rebuilt and modernized, The program has expanded, but the core mission remains the same: to provide safety for women and children who have nowhere else to go, to offer not just shelter, but dignity, not just survival, but hope. And on the wall of the main building, there's a photograph of two women. Elizabeth Mercer, young and smiling, taken before tragedy found her, and Sarah Whitmore Mercer, standing on the ranch porch, her arm around Clara, her face showing every hard year she'd lived through and the strength she'd gained from surviving them. Beneath the photographs, a simple plaque, in memory of Elizabeth Mercer, who dreamed of a refuge for the lost and vulnerable, and in honor of Sarah Whitmore Mercer, who made that dream real. Two women, one legacy. That courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to stand and fight anyway. That's the story. That's the lesson. That's what Red Hollow teaches everyone who passes through. That you don't have to be perfect to make a difference. You don't have to be fearless to be brave. You just have to show up, stand your ground, and refuse to let the darkness win. Sometimes that's enough to change the world. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it's enough to change yourself.